Chapter 1. This is the Precious Present. This is the precious present. When you were younger, you probably longed for many of the good things you now possess. If you have a home, a good job, a car, a spouse, one or more children, a stereo and music collection, a college degree, or things of this nature, there was probably once a time when you thought, if only I could have these things, I would always be happy. I would wish for nothing more. There have probably been times in the past when you suffered severe worry or severe pain, and you thought, if I could just have a normal, secure, and comfortable life, I would be contented and I would always appreciate it. This is the precious present, but strangely, sadly, few people know it. Chances are, when you are older, you will look back on days like today and think, I was younger then, I was thinner, I had better health, I had fun, I had good times, I had more sex, I had a good job, I worried more than I should have, and I got tired and discouraged sometimes, but really, life was very good then. This is the precious present, regardless of what yesterday was like, regardless of what tomorrow may bring. When your inner eyes open and you can find immense beauty hidden within the inconsequential details of daily life. When your inner ears open and you can hear the subtle, lovely music of the universe everywhere you go. When the heart of your heart opens, you can take deep pleasure in the company of people around you, family, friends, acquaintances, or strangers, including those whose characters are less than perfect, just as your character is less than perfect. When you are open to the beauty, mystery, and grandeur of ordinary existence, you get it. That it always has been beautiful, mysterious, and grand, and always will be. This is the precious present. Since the beginning of recorded history, mystics, religious leaders, philosophers, artists, poets, and some inspired madmen have said so. Thomas Traherne, a Protestant minister and poet of the 17th century, wrote, You never enjoy the world aright till the sea itself floweth in your veins, and you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars, and perceive yourself to be the sole heir of the whole world, and more than so, because men are in it, who are every one sole heirs as well as you. Till you can sing and rejoice and delight in God, as misers do in gold, and kings in scepters, you can never enjoy the world. Yet further, you never enjoyed the world aright, till you love so the beauty of enjoying it, that you are covetous and earnest to persuade others to enjoy it, and so perfectly hate the abominable corruption of men in despising it, that you had rather suffer the flames of hell than willingly be guilty of their error. The world is a mirror of infinite beauty, yet no man sees it. It is a temple of majesty, yet no man regards it. It is a region of light and peace. Did not man disquiet it? It is the paradise of God. We do not often meet people who really understand that this is the precious present. Although such people appear from time to time in every culture and have turned up at every period in history, they are still fairly rare. When they do turn up, they are probably more often dismissed, ridiculed, or persecuted than admired and remembered. Nevertheless, their teachings have been admired and remembered often enough over the centuries that the accumulated body of their work has grown large and impressive. Any college student will encounter their words among the immortal treasures of world literature. Without the help of these teachers, it would never would have occurred to me that this is the precious present. There may be people among us who know that this is the precious present, but who don't write poetry, preach sermons, or boast about how happy they are. If so, they live quietly, enjoying the world rightly, loving other people, loving nature, behaving decently, wisely, and generously. They possess no unusual powers or knowledge, nor do they need any. They may not be particularly admired, nor do they want much admiration. Some religious traditions teach that such people make it possible for civilized life to continue. Once you start looking for it, you'll find the idea that this is the precious present in many unexpected places. One of my favorite sources is a short story called Strange Wine, written by Harlan Ellison, an author best known for his quirky, macabre science fiction stories. Ellison tells the story of an ordinary middle-aged male Earthling who lives a life that is painful and banal by most standards. After killing himself, he regains consciousness on a bleak alien planet inhabited by ugly crab-like beings. He realized that he lived on this distant planet before he lived on Earth, and that he was destined to return to it after his life on Earth had ended. He asks what crime he committed that he had to endure such a terrible life on Earth. He is told that he had committed no crime. His life on the alien world had been so exemplary that he was rewarded with the opportunity to spend a lifetime on Earth because Earth was the pleasure planet, the most lovely and pleasant world in the universe. The story concludes, and he knew they had given him the only gift of joy permitted to the races of beings who lived in the far galaxies, the gift of a few precious years on a world where anguish was so much less than known everywhere else. He remembered the rain and the sleep and the feel of the beach sand beneath his feet, and the ocean rolling in to whisper its eternal song. And on just such nights as those he had despised on earth, he slept and dreamed good dreams of life on the pleasure planet. Objectively, it seems improbable that the Earth is in fact the pleasure planet in our corner of the universe, but it is a charming notion because it represents a useful fiction. Scientists and mathematicians often take advantage of useful fictions in order to understand things that would otherwise be inconceivable. For example, an atom is not a miniature solar system in which electrons orbit the nucleus the way planets orbit a star. Yet, it is sometimes useful to think of atoms in that way. Something interesting happens if you try pretending that Earth is the pleasure planet. The smallest details of your existence appear in a new light. People who formerly seemed obnoxious appear as minor distractions. The simple fact of their humanity makes them seem appealing and honorable. Events, circumstances, and sensations that once seemed adverse seem more neutral. They contain pleasant elements that you would otherwise have overlooked. It's another gray, rainy day on the pleasure planet. What lovely, cool, sweet-smelling fog they have here. I'm going to see the dentist on the pleasure planet. How nice the dentists are here. How kind they are to provide sterile instruments, Novocaine, and laughing gas. Pain here on the pleasure planet is hardly ever severe. You might perceive rich treasure where before you only perceived tedium and disappointment. Yellow mustard in full bloom in a vacant lot. How beautiful! Back home on Zartan, they would give a month's salary just for a glimpse of this. In short, imagining that this is the pleasure planet, and further imagining that you are one of the lucky few people who know it, temporarily tricks your relentless mind into wanting what you have. This experience may not be profound and probably won't last long, but it gives you a glimpse of what it might be like to want what you have completely, all day, every day. Careful scientific studies have shown that people who win large sums of money in lotteries end up slightly less happy on average than they were before. This is particularly striking when you consider the biggest lottery ticket buyers tend to be poorly educated and financially insecure. Scientific research also indicates why winning large sums of money make people less happy. They lose their ability to enjoy small, ordinary pleasures. In other words, they lose their ability to enjoy the precious present. If you are thinking, I would enjoy the money more than the others do, you are normal. Everybody says that. If this is the precious present, then it is pointless to spend your life striving for more and more prosperity, admiration, or love. It is foolish to postpone enjoyment of your ordinary life until you are more successful, more secure, or more loved than you are today. If this is the precious present, then it is especially unwise to hurt other people or the society you live in or the planet you live on in order to obtain status or goods that seductively promise great happiness. Wanting what you have means really getting it, that this is the precious present. Wanting what you have means actively appreciating the good things in your life right now and keeping your senses attuned to the subtle pleasures and mysteries of ordinary existence. Look at the facts. People who live in big houses are no happier than people who live in small houses. Powerful, influential people are no more contented than ordinary citizens. Owners of Porsches and Aston Martins are no more at peace than owners of Toyotas or Chevrolets. Beautiful people are no happier than plain people. I recall a young woman who I saw for many months as a psychotherapy client. She was as beautiful as any woman I have ever seen in the movies or in person. She was extremely intelligent and quite likable. She spent her entire life tormented by the possibility that she might encounter another woman prettier than she. A colleague who has treated a number of exceptionally wealthy people tells me that they have been the most miserable clients she has ever encountered. Science backs me up on this. Once life's basic needs are met, socioeconomic status is unrelated to happiness. What about your bills, your bald spot, the traffic jam you face each morning, the smog you have no choice but to breathe, and all the other annoyances and heartaches in your life? Should you want them too? It's a matter of perspective. You can resent your bills or be grateful for the things you own that you are now paying for. You can resent your bald spot or be glad you have a head. You can detest your in-laws or be glad you were so lucky in love that you were able to marry. Wanting what you have has two elements. One is cheerfully enjoying the good things in your life, including the sensual pleasures. That sounds pleasant and not too difficult. The other is renouncing your desires for all the things you want but don't have. That's the tough part. Try to not want to win the lottery. Try to not want a nice vacation. Try to not miss your friends and family when you are away from them. To most people, this seems impossible. Yet, the renunciation is as necessary as the cheerful enjoyment. People who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of sensual pleasure find that the more pleasure they get, the more they want. Small, ordinary pleasures soon lose their power to please and must be replaced with more intense or exotic ones. Heedless sensualists usually meet a bad end. They learn the hard way that their desires are relentless and insatiable. Wanting what you have is so simple and so obviously wise. Why should it be so difficult? Well, to answer this question, we must examine human nature. Why do people spend so much of their lives making themselves and each other unhappy, making war, and destroying the planet? For now, it will suffice to say that human nature is partly instinctive and under genetic control. Instincts neither promote happiness nor steer us away from suffering. That is not their purpose. As I will describe in detail, the ultimate purpose of all instincts is to promote reproductive success, which is essentially irrelevant to happiness or goodness. Some pre-industrial cultures seem remarkably free of greed, selfishness, sexism, and violence, and display exquisite sensitivity to environmental principles. Some authors teach that these societies represent true human nature, uncontaminated by harmful modern values. My view is somewhat different. Societies like these are invariably ancient, having been stable and uninterrupted for thousands of years. Consequently, they had sufficient time to develop elaborate social mechanisms to minimize and redirect the perennial desire for more. In a sense, they have discovered some version of the principles and methods I teach in this book, or if you prefer to look at it the other way around, this book summarizes and reinstates the principles that they have discovered. Nonetheless, It is unwise to idealize such societies, as the discredited proponents of the noble savage myth have done for hundreds of years. The important matter is discussed in more detail in Chapter 3, Human Nature. It is human nature always to want just a little more. People spend their lives honestly believing that they have almost enough of what they want. Just a little more will put them over the top. Then they will be contented forever. The trouble is, wanting just a little more is the opposite of wanting what you have. People seek after more under the delusion that they will be happy when they get more. In fact, if and when they get more, they are not any happier than when they were before, and they still want more. When almost all people want more all the time, hatred, regret, resentment, despair, crime, war, and planetary destruction are inevitable. That people want more is an obvious secret. We all implicitly understand that people spending their lives wanting what they don't have, but the facts is so rarely acknowledged in routine human interaction that it becomes invisible. What people want more of is another obvious secret. Few people spend their lives obsessively accumulating more socks or rocks or rubber bands. Though we never discuss it, we all agree that such things are nearly worthless. Few people spend their lives pursuing loneliness or pain. Those that do are considered sick. People pursue a huge number of things in innumerable ways, but what they really want is easily summarized. First, of course, people want to survive. They want air and water above all, then food and shelter. These require no further discussion. It is what people want after their survival needs are met that concern us here. People want various forms of wealth, or the things that money buys. People want to be admired by others. Sometimes they want to influence others. People want to be loved in various ways. They want to gratify their sexual desires and romantic longings. They want friends and allies who will appreciate their good features and admirable behavior while overlooking their less attractive features and self-serving actions. People want to give love too, but they want to give it selectively. First to other close relatives, especially children, then to lovers and friends. All people want their children and close relatives to survive, and then to acquire wealth, status, and love of their own. Finally, people want freedom from fear that they will lose their wealth, power, and love they have managed to achieve. If they lose it, they feel terrible, sad, or angry. Then they want to get it back again and honestly believe they must continue to feel terrible until they succeed. Not everyone wants all of these things all of the time, but everyone wants most of these things most of the time. And no matter how much they get, they still want more. We all know these things, yet we rarely discuss them, rarely admit them. History tells us that many wealthy individuals have spent all their money and all their lives trying to satiate their desires without success. The lives of many of our richest and most popular entertainers provide examples of this phenomenon. For example, in 1991, Wilt Chamberlain published an autobiography in which he estimated he had enjoyed sexual relations with 20,000 women. Presumably, some of these women were exceptionally beautiful, charming, and talented in the erotic arts. Why wouldn't 200 suffice? Why wouldn't 5,000 suffice? There is nothing unusual about Wilt Chamberlain's story. It's one that's been shared by extremely rich, powerful men throughout the ages. The word enough does not appear in Instinct's dictionary. The same principle applies to every human desire, and as much to women as to men. We could make the same point with Imelda Marcos' lust for shoes, or George Bush's or Margaret Thatcher's lust for power, or Queen Elizabeth's lust for admiration, or Michael Milken's lust for money, or Leona Hemsley's lust for luxury, or Arnold Schwarzenegger's lust for muscles, or Madonna's lust for fame, or Joe Montana's lust to be the best quarterback who ever lived, and so on. But celebrities don't tell the story properly. The best examples are the untold billions of ordinary people in any society at any time in history who have worked hard all of their lives in spite of cruel adversity and unbearable heartache in the hopes of increasing their prosperity and status in the community and providing a better life for their children. If you learn to want what you have, will you still work hard to have a better life? Yes, but the emphasis will change. Once you really understand that your own desires are insatiable, you become more able to take control of your own life. You will no longer allow your instinctive desire for more to lead you by the nose through your own life. Your primary motive will change from having a better life to having a good life. Working hard to have a better life will become something you might do as you deeply appreciate ordinary existence. When you learn to want what you have, you will start to live in accordance with the old saying that happiness is a way of traveling rather than a destination. When you really understand that, you might strive for a better life, but you will not do so fanatically, obsessively, or to the point that your ambitions unnecessarily harm yourself, other people, or the planet. I have known people who use the living in the present as an excuse for living irresponsibly, for failing to plan ahead, or for taking advantage of the diligence and generosity of others. I don't admire people like that, and I don't expect you to admire them either. And I don't wish to encourage anyone to live that way. We all have duties and responsibilities to ourselves as well as others, which sometimes seem burdensome. Really knowing that this is the precious present makes it possible for us to carry those burdens cheerfully. It also helps us identify burdens we have taken on unnecessarily, burdens that ultimately won't benefit us or anyone else. Those we can and should put down. But simply abandoning legitimate responsibilities and duties cheapens existence. Every time I mention the relentless desire for more at a social gathering, someone says, "Well, I think it's true that a lot of people automatically strive for more. I'm happy to say that it isn't true for me." I'm amazed at who has said this to me. It seems that the more people are snared by their own desires, the less they realize it. A successful, financially secure psychologist who unnecessarily exhausts himself working 70 hours a week recently said it. A mother who lives in constant dread that her children might miss some small social or educational advantage recently said it. A man who continuously longs for new sexual partners said it. A woman who compulsively shops for more stylish clothes and who lives in a big, fashionable house she cannot afford said it. A man who runs 70 miles a week in hope of shaving off 5 minutes off his best marathon time said it. A woman who is saving money for breast implants said it. A man who feels really terrible because he is infertile said it. A woman who feels really terrible because she is 40 and unmarried said it. Don't be complacent. Reading a few pages of an inspiring book doesn't change anything. Try thinking of it this way. Estimate how many times in a typical day you wish for better circumstances of one kind or another. Now estimate how many times in a typical day you say to yourself, "My life is just fine the way it is." In the same way, estimate how many times in a typical day you dream about improving yourself in some way. Now estimate how many times in a typical day you say to yourself, "Except for a certain amount of selfishness and lack of compassion, I am fine just the way I am." If you are like the vast majority of people, the amount of wishing for better circumstances and improved personal qualities greatly exceeds the amount of contentment with your life and yourself as they are now. Now be honest with yourself. How long will it take and how hard will it be to change those lifelong instinct-driven habits? If you want to want what you have, you've got your work cut out for you. Is wanting what you have really a good idea? Isn't it really human nature always to want just a little more? If you doubt these propositions, I congratulate you. I don't think I have made a strong case yet. I am a skeptic, hard-headed person, so I wrote this book with other people like me in mind. In the next 2 chapters, I use logic and fact to convince you. If I am successful, I will change your mind about these things. But changing your mind is easy. Changing your heart is hard. If you decide that you want to want what you have, and that doing so is difficult because it contradicts human nature, you will still need to change your heart. Otherwise, you will have acquired only a few useless and unpopular opinions. Part 2 tells how to get your heart to change. How can a book produce a change of heart? That's a question I am particularly qualified to answer because I am a psychotherapist. Psychotherapists, after all, are in the heart-changing business. Phobic patients want to feel safe in elevators but can't. Depressed patients want to enjoy life but can't. Alcoholics know in theory that alcohol is destroying them, but their feelings, thoughts, and actions do not conform to their knowledge. Well-trained and up-to-date psychotherapists routinely help phobic, depressed, anxious, and alcoholic patients and others achieve the change of heart they want. Psychotherapists have traditionally regarded heart changing as a murky and mystical business. Many of us were taught in graduate school that a change of heart can only occur as the result of an exhaustive, prolonged investigation of the patient's early childhood memories, conducted according to Freudian principles, combined with an elusive, hard-to-define healing relationship between the patient and the therapist. There is no question that some people benefited from this approach, but treatment was too slow and expensive to benefit many others, and treatment often failed, sometimes with heartbreaking results. Fortunately, times have changed. A relatively new but respectable school of psychotherapy, cognitive psychotherapy, takes much of the mystery out of heart changing. Psychotherapists still don't bat 1,000, but our batting average is going up. One likely reason for cognitive psychotherapy success is that its premises are easy to understand. Cognitive therapy holds that emotions and behaviors originate from thoughts, which in turn originate from beliefs. Thoughts are often repetitive and illogical, and beliefs are often incorrect. In short, the thoughts and beliefs that produce unhappy feelings and unwanted behaviors are essentially bad habits. Repetitive harmful thoughts can be monitored the same way that other bad habits are monitored, and they can be altered the same way that other bad habits are altered. When habitual harmful thoughts are altered, people feel better or behave more constructively. Cognitive therapy is intended as a remedy for unhappy feelings and unwanted behaviors. Systematic scientific research suggests it is superior to other methods. I have seen it help many people with all kinds of problems. However, it seems to me that unhappy feelings and unwanted behaviors are really just a special case of the human condition. Most unhappy feelings and unwanted behaviors grow from the same instinctive root as happy feelings and wanted behaviors. They all support reproductive success in one way or another. It seems to me that cognitive methods might be used not just to treat mental disorders, but also the fundamental problems of the human condition. Part 2 of this book, chapters 5 through 7, employ cognitive principles to teach you how to want what you have. The cognitive methods I suggest revolve around 3 primary principles: compassion, attention, and gratitude. Each principle approaches the task of wanting what you have from a different direction. Each is an intention, a way of traveling rather than a destination. Each requires clarity of purpose and diligence. Each must be practiced constantly in order to produce a lasting change of heart. Compassion is the intention to see each human being as no better or worse than yourself, neither more or less important, and as fundamentally similar to yourself. Attention is the intention to avoid unnecessary value judgments about your own experience, both internal and external experience. In other words, attention is the intention to live without reservation in the here and now. Gratitude is the intention to count your blessings every day, every minute, while avoiding, whenever possible, the belief that you need or deserve different circumstances. I capitalize the words compassion, attention, and gratitude to remind the reader that I use these terms in a specialized way and associate them with the specific techniques that I will describe in detail in subsequent chapters. For the same reason, I capitalize more when I mean to refer to the instinctively driven, relentless, insidious desire for more wealth, status, and love. In cognitive psychotherapy, the effort to substitute constructive thoughts for harmful ones is a temporary measure. After a few weeks or months, the new desired thoughts become automatic, and the old undesired ones become less and less frequent until they disappear. The situation is different when you are practicing compassion, attention, and gratitude. Instinct never stops whispering in your ear that you would be happier if you could just have a little more. Therefore, if compassion, attention, and gratitude are to have a lifelong effect, they must be lifelong practices. In part 3 of this book, I describe in detail how the methods presented in part 2 can be integrated into an ordinary life. I discuss the moral dilemmas that arise in daily life and how the principles of compassion, attention, and gratitude can guide us through these moral dilemmas that otherwise seem insoluble. I also discuss how these principles can be integrated into psychotherapy. It is natural for you to wonder, well, who am I and what authority I claim? Well, I have a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and I have maintained a full-time private practice in a medium-sized city in Northern California for about 10 years. I have worked in the criminal, civil, and family courts, and in jails, prisons, and hospitals. I have treated children, teenagers, adults, and families for just about every kind of problem in living. I have treated geniuses and mentally retarded people, have treated very beautiful and very plain people, very rich people, very poor people, successful and unsuccessful people, very sick people, and dying people. Psychology is a science, not too different from geology or botany, so I have been trained to think skeptically about my subject and to try to distinguish truth from speculation and fantasy. You can walk into any bookstore and find hundreds of psychology, new age, self-help, and metaphysical books filled entirely with speculation and fantasy. Additionally, much of the day-to-day practice of psychotherapy is based on unproven beliefs of the various psychotherapeutic schools. I hope my training as a scientist has given me the skepticism and self-discipline necessary to avoid presenting fantasy and speculation as though they are fact. This book does not arise from my own original scientific research. Nevertheless, I have done my best to derive most of my assertions from scientific research or from the circumstantial evidence of anthropology and history. I have done my best to avoid making statements or claims that contradict current scientific understanding. Psychology is still a primitive science, so few psychologists agree with each other, and every important idea of psychology is filled with controversy. I can't discuss every side of every controversy, but I have tried to indicate which of my positions are especially controversial. It is natural for you to wonder, how can I know that these methods will work for me? I hold that the practice of compassion, attention, and gratitude is inherently worthwhile. If you practice compassion, you will be compassionate, which is its own reward. If you practice attention, you will be more attentive, which is its own reward. If you practice gratitude, you will be more grateful, which is its own reward. I don't mean to say that if you practice compassion, attention, and gratitude, you will become able to want what you have. I mean to say that practicing compassion, attention, and gratitude diligently, persistently, and wisely is identical to wanting what you have. I suspect that the practice of compassion, attention, and gratitude may have additional practical benefits, For example, it seems likely that this practice might improve the quality of marriage and family life. It might protect people from depression and anxiety and other psychological troubles. It might make people more resistant to various forms of loss and stress. And it might make some people more cheerful and friendly. If compassion, attention, and gratitude come to be widely practiced, I hope there will be some responsible scientific research regarding such possible benefits. It sometimes happens that a psychotherapy client will say with deep feeling something like this: I have been coming to see you for 5 months, and I am still not happy. I have been in and out of therapy all my life, and I am still not happy. I have been married 3 times, and all my marriages made me miserable. But I hate being single. I thought having children would make me happy, but being a parent has turned out to be so difficult. What is it going to take? When will my day come? Considering the inherent difficulties of the human condition, I'm always surprised that clients don't ask this question like this more often. Like other seasoned psychotherapists, I could think of 10 acceptable answers before you could drop a stick. Well, there remain many gaps in your recollection of your early life. You haven't even begun to resolve your ambivalent feelings about your mother's death. As long as you continue to fend off painful feelings about the abuse and neglect you suffered as a child, those feelings will continue to haunt you in indirect and insidious ways. Don't expect to feel completely happy until you have learned how to feel completely unhappy without shame or reluctance. Yet questions like this used to give me a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, not because I was at a loss for answers, but because I questioned the validity of my answers. My answers were not foolish or harmful. They probably helped people, but they seemed incomplete. It seemed to me that psychotherapists indefinitely postpone the day when promised happiness finally arrives. When I asked my colleagues how they respond to questions like this, I found that their answers were about the same as mine, so I knew that technically I was doing okay. Such questions troubled me because I used to wonder when my day would come, and I knew that many of my colleagues, even the very successful and well-trained ones, often wondered when their days will come. If facile answers don't satisfy me or my colleagues, why should they satisfy our clients? I don't get a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach anymore. Most clients would be hurt and confused if I said, your day is every day. So I don't quite say it that way. And sometimes I give the same conventional answers other psychotherapists offer. The difference is that I know now that this is the precious present, and that ordinary people can come to understand that too. How successful am I at wanting what I have? I do better some days than others, just as you will. Chapter 2: Desire, Suffering, and Joy. The 5 prominent religions all began with original sin. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all accept the Old Testament of the Bible as the revealed Word of God. The first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, says that the human race has been evil ever since Adam and Eve disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit. In short, each of these religions insist we must try very hard all of our lives to be good enough to win God's forgiveness. Otherwise, we might suffer in this life or the next. Hindus and Buddhists also begin with a version of original sin, which, upon reflection, is surprisingly similar to the Judeo-Christian one. According to the Hindu-Buddhist version, our suffering in this life and the next is not caused by God's wrath. Instead, it is the inevitable outcome of our own silly delusions, for which God, or the gods, pity us. The silliest and most harmful delusion is the belief that we would be happy if we could justify all of our desires. Not only does this belief cause us to harm ourselves and others, it separates us from God. The only way to avoid suffering and to get right with God is to renounce our desires. The common theme in the 2 versions of original sin is that human beings are their own worst enemies. They unwittingly harm themselves and disappoint God with their greed, selfishness, pride, and so on. In one way or another, every major religion recommends the practice of compassion, attention, and gratitude. In Christianity, compassion is often called love, or Christian love, or charity. In the Hindu Buddhist tradition, it's more often called service to others or loving kindness. In Christianity, attention is usually called humility. Hindus and Buddhists typically call it mindfulness. In Christianity, gratitude is often called thankfulness. The details differ from one religion to another, but all suggest that practicing these virtues continually throughout life helps to redeem original sin. In the United States and other modern nations, original sin is out of fashion. I have noticed that even in conservative Protestant churches, ministers at the pulpit don't often jab their fingers at the congregation and howl, "You are all sinners. I implore Almighty God for forgiveness before your allotted time runs out." This was a common practice just a few decades ago. My friend Kathy put it this way a few days ago. "I'm a good person. I don't have affairs. I don't beat my kids. I don't drink too much or take drugs. I try to do good things for my community. I don't see why I need to beg God for forgiveness." Kathy considers herself a Christian and a spiritual person. Her view is a quite common one. Kathy is not an obviously prideful or greedy person. She seems able to do good without worrying about original sin. I don't think she spends much time worrying about thankfulness or humility. You might say that she is a loving person, though most of her love is directed towards a small circle of family and friends with an occasional nod to a charity or good cause. She wears nice clothes, drives a nice car, and sends her kids to private school, dancing lessons, and soccer practice. She's a devoted, loving mother. She spends considerable time and money decorating her medium-sized home. I spent a chapter or two of my life hanging around with serious seekers. I used to call them my bliss buddies. I'm referring to the people who dedicate their lives to prayer, meditation, religious study, and so on, sometimes under the direction of an autocratic spiritual advisor or guru. They used to say to me, "My uptight Christian parents had it all wrong. God doesn't hate us, God loves us. And He's not far away in heaven. He's right here at the center of each of us. All you have to do is sit down and meditate to see that for yourself. It's so obvious." Of course, this is not an uncommon view either. It has its charm and some people teach it persuasively. Why do religions teach original sin? Why does each require its own version of compassion, attention, and gratitude? Are these obsolete medieval doctrines, or do they provide a useful guide for modern people? If they are still valid, how do we explain that to Kathy? How do we respond to my old bliss buddies? In the following paragraphs, I'm going to suggest that the doctrine of original sin still carries essential wisdom. Though modern people have lost sight of it, I will try to restate that essential wisdom in terms that make more sense to them. I suspect that the ancient anonymous people who originally formulated the doctrines of original sin were simply describing a phenomenon they had observed repeatedly but could not understand. Desire is insatiable. When old desires are gratified, new ones take their place. Many desires seem perfectly innocent, but a lifetime of hoping and striving for an unbroken succession of desires produces unanticipated, painful consequences. The insatiability of desire must have seemed odd to the ancient priests and prophets. It must have struck them as sad and ironic that people often destroy themselves or the people they love in the futile quest to satisfy all their desires. It must have seemed inexplicable to them that people spent their entire lives obsessed with tomorrow and yesterday when only the present can be counted as real and important. They must have puzzled over people whose lives were painfully disrupted by desires for relatively unimportant things. They must have wondered why people suffered so deeply over relatively minor humiliations, betrayals, or abandonments, real or imagined, or loss of status. They must have wondered at anguish and dread in reaction to old age, illness, and death when everyone knows that old age, illness, and death come to all animals and all people? Who can blame the ancient Judeo-Christians for thinking that the Creator must be disgusted with the human race? Who can blame Buddha for teaching his followers to mistrust and thwart desire? Of course, the people who formulated these doctrines didn't understand the real reason that desire is insatiable any more than they could understand why eclipses occur or what lightning is. These are complex natural phenomena. The relentless desire for more is another complex natural phenomenon, much harder to understand than lightning or eclipses. It was really only about 20 years ago that scientists began to understand why desire is insatiable. For that matter, it is hard for modern people to be sure that desire is insatiable. Advertising and popular culture constantly tell us that lasting contentment can be attained. Just get a better wardrobe, another degree, a faster PC, a more stylish car, a nicer body, or a more attractive romantic partner, and you will be home free. Many modern people imagine that it's not human nature that is the problem, but some kind of misunderstanding or an aberration of history that will soon be corrected. Maybe they speculate, if we didn't have advertising or television, or if we could eliminate poverty, or if everyone held to traditional family values, then desires would be moderate and always constructive and would not do harm. Understanding the instinctive biological roots of insatiable desires helps modern people understand the challenges of wanting what they have. I'll be explaining the instinctive biological roots of relentless, insatiable desire for more in the next chapter. If Kathy really wanted to know my opinion, which is unlikely, I would say something like this. If you try to think of yourself as a wicked person or a sinner, you will become confused because you are indeed a nice, decent, and sensible person by contemporary standards. There are two problems with your present way of life. First, just like everyone else, you spend your time and energy heedlessly trying to satisfy your nice, decent desires without stopping to consider that they are insatiable. For example, your very decent and normal desire for your children to be happy, healthy, attractive, and successful is fundamentally similar to the desire for, say, cocaine. No matter how much of it you get, you're going to want some more. In the process of satisfying your nice, decent, satiable desires, you may be doing unintended harm to yourself, the people you love, the human race, or the planet. If you spend your life heedlessly attending to your nice, decent desires without questioning them, you will become smug and self-satisfied. Additionally, the day will come when you realize that you will never possess many of the things you desire most deeply. That discovery is likely to cause you great unhappiness. Finally, it is inevitable that you will lose some of the good things you now possess through misfortune, illness, old age, or death. The second problem is that your existence is lukewarm. The world is a mirror of infinite beauty, yet you do not see it. The present moment is the most precious of all things, but you don't get it. Every person, perhaps every living thing, wears God's face, but you do not suspect it. To my old bliss buddies, my message would be simpler. I would say, it isn't that easy to be humble, kind, and thankful, and to know God. If it were as easy as you say, we would all be doing it. Much spiritual striving is an obvious attempt to satisfy ordinary desires in unusual ways. Many seekers, secretly or unconsciously, hope that their meditation, prayer, and other efforts will beget them wealth or various forms of status or love. If you think it's easy, you know too little about human nature and too little about yourself. You are also ignoring the sad and ironic history of religion. It is convenient to think about wanting what you have in terms of a carrot and a stick. Wanting what you have is a way of finding a deeper and more lasting kind of pleasure. That's the carrot. Wanting what you have is also a way of avoiding suffering that is otherwise inevitable. That's the stick. The stick, avoiding suffering. In order to comprehend the relationship between desire and suffering, we must make a fundamental distinction between pain and suffering. Though widely assumed to be identical, they are not. Pain cannot be avoided. In fact, both emotional and physical pain are useful and help us survive. Pain reminds us, in a way that we cannot ignore, that we should be more careful. Even Buddha must have banged his shin on a coffee table every once in a while. Suffering, on the other hand, is optional and unnecessary, at least in theory. This may seem as a strange distinction at first, but a little explanation reveals that it is consistent with ordinary experience. Consider the following two scenarios. Scenario number 1. Your wife bullies you into spending a hot Sunday afternoon helping her lazy, self-centered, incompetent brother build his new patio cover. The chore seems especially onerous because you are tired, having spent most of Saturday catching up at the office. As the afternoon drags on, your nose and bald spot get painfully sunburned. Characteristically, it did not occur to your host to have some cold drinks on hand. You long to leave in time to watch the last half of the football game you have looked forward to all week, but the job progresses with agonizing slowness because you have to do most of the work yourself. You have to stop to fix your relative's mistakes, and he has failed to provide essential tools and materials. As your vexation mounts to the point where you are ready to abandon the job unfinished, he asks you to help him move a heavy beam. He stumbles over a hammer he foolishly left laying on the ground. He goes down, taking you and the beam with him. The beam lands on your hand the way a boot heel might land on an Easter egg. Never in your life has anything hurt so much. The 3 hours you spend waiting at the emergency room seem like 3 centuries. The emergency room doctor looks at it for 10 seconds and informs you that it can wait until you see a private orthopedist the following morning. When you get home, you discover that the pain medication he gave you is Tylenol. Scenario number 2. You are asked for the first time to play on your department's softball team at the annual company picnic. The softball game is a company tradition. Its atmosphere of friendly rivalry hides the emotional significance given it by its players and the departments they represent. This invitation represents a personal and professional triumph for you, a newcomer in the department, as it indicates that you have been accepted by people you once admired and feared. Still, you dread the game, since you are never much of a ball player, or an athlete for that matter, and you know your friends want you to win. You play better than you had expected, but the team seems doomed to defeat. Although things go a little better in the last few innings, the outlook is dim when you come to the plate in the bottom of the 9th with your team 1 run behind. Uncharacteristically, you ask God to help you not strike out. She grants you your prayer. You accidentally hit a double. The next batter sacrifices your team scores a run, and you move to third base. The formerly drowsy audience is now screaming with excitement. The batter fouls away 1 pitch after another, with 2 strikes and 2 outs. Hope starts to fade. The crowd heads for the barbecue pit. Then, the catcher, a tall, heavy man, drops the ball, which rolls towards the backstop on the first base side. A sudden mad vision of Jackie Robinson in the 1955 World Series flashes into your head. You cannot streak a dart for home as you are too old and fat, but you run faster than you have in 15 years. The catcher has retrieved the ball. He looks determined to stop you at any cost. You attempt the first headfirst slide of your life, succeed despite the lack of time for a second player, and win the game. In the excitement, you did not notice that the catcher had stepped on your hand. At some point during the champagne shower, you become dimly aware that your hand aches. Later on, you discover it is starting to resemble an eggplant. Your friend regards your injury as a further evidence of your heroism. The boss's brother, an orthopedist, offers to treat it at no charge the next morning in his office. He asks if you want pain medicine, but you are pretty sure that Tylenol will be enough. The boss offers you a few days off on company time. Most readers will agree that the victim in the first scenario will experience more pain than the victim in the second one, even if the injuries are physically identical. Additionally, the first victim will experience his pain as suffering. The second victim will likely endure his pain with good cheer. He will not think of himself as suffering, nor will he remember his pain that way after the incident is resolved. Pain is not simple. Whether something hurts and how much it hurts depends on what you are paying attention to and what you feel you have gained or lost as a result of the injury. Many a nine-fingered carpenter would tell you he only felt a bump when he cut it off his finger. He was paying attention to something else. Professional athletes and dancers often gladly endure pain that would be unbearable to other people, particularly if their team is winning or if their performance gains the admiration of their teammates or fans. Pain is an immediate physical or emotional reaction. Pain may be mild or severe, depending on many factors, but no one can entirely avoid pain. Suffering is the more complex and prolonged emotional reaction that may or may not accompany pain, depending on how the injured person interprets the meaning of the pain and the circumstances associated with it. Pain may be born with resentment, fear, and anguish, in which case it becomes identical with suffering, or it may be born with good cheer and a light heart. Military physicians often reported observing groups of severely wounded soldiers who seem unusually calm and pain-free and who do not request morphine. This occurs only under certain military circumstances. Typically, the soldiers feel both that they have done their duty and that they are lucky to have survived. They know that when they return home, they will be considered heroes. They know the war will continue, but they are wounded seriously enough that they will not be required to fight again. The meaning of their circumstances drastically alters their experience of pain. As the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius says, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your own estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Burning to death normally causes unimaginable suffering. Yet most parents would willingly burn to death if that were necessary to rescue their children from a burning building. They would consider the pain inconsequential. They would probably die feeling happy that their children had survived. When people go to a nursing home to die, feeling lonely and forgotten, they suffer greatly. But perhaps it's not so bad to go to a nursing home to die if you know for certain that your memory will long be cherished by many people who know you. There are at least 4 reasons that the desire for more causes suffering. Number 1, no one avoids sorrow, humiliation, or pain, and no one avoids death. Number 2, striving for more is not fun. Number 3, the desire for more often does harm. And number 4, the desire for more ignores spiritual longing. We will discuss these in turn. Sorrow, humiliation, and death. That's a cheerful heading, isn't it? In most American settings, discussing these matters is about as socially acceptable as toilet talk. In contrast, most other cultures openly acknowledge that these are inevitable parts of life. The book of Ecclesiastes 9:11 in the Bible says, "The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor the men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all." The 11th century Tibetan Buddhist monk and teacher Milarepa put it this way: all worldly pursuits have but the one unavoidable and inevitable end, which is sorrow. Acquisitions end in dispersion, building in destruction, meeting in separations, birth in deaths. Knowing this, one should, from the very first, renounce acquisition and heaping up, and building and meeting, and faithful to the commands of the eminent guru, set about realizing the truth. It's nice to get a promotion and another after that, and another after that. But who spends her entire career moving up the promotional ladder? Things happen, things go wrong. The company folds, the industry collapses, the economy goes south. Or you resist the boss's inappropriate sexual advances and makes you an enemy. It's nice to spend your whole life, or at least your first 70 years, vigorous, robust, and pain-free. but how many people succeed? It's smart to exercise, eat a healthy diet, wear seatbelts, and so on, and these precautions improve your odds. But things happen, things go wrong. It's good to stay in love with your spouse all your life. It's good to have a sexy, cheerful, compassionate, intimate, mutually supportive marriage. Working on honest, constructive communication improves your odds. But things happen, things go wrong. We could look at financial security, access to leisure and recreation, relations with extended family, political freedom, personal appearance, and many other important areas of life in the same way. Chances are things will go wrong. And of course, there's always death. If you are lucky, you love your parents and other relatives of their generation. If you are lucky, they will die while you are in the prime of your life, and you will grieve their passing. Presumably, you prefer not to die prematurely. If all does not go well, which is likely, some of the younger people you love will also precede you in death, and you will grieve for them too. Above all, there is the inevitability of your own demise to contemplate. Like I said, things happen, things go wrong. The Greek philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb the minds of men, but the view they take from them." The trouble with things going wrong is not just that they go wrong, it's how you feel anticipating that they will go wrong, and how you feel after they do go wrong. When things go wrong, pain is inevitable. When you anticipate the ways that things might go wrong, that hurts too. But if your life is totally dedicated to the fulfillment of your desires for more, you will not just feel pain when things go wrong. You will suffer. That's because a life dedicated to getting more generates certain implicit beliefs. When you dedicate your life to getting more, your routine thoughts, feelings, and actions revolve around satisfying your desires. Chances are they are conventional desires: more friends, influence, prosperity, professional prestige, and so on. That doesn't seem so bad. But as these desires become woven into the fabric of your life, of yourself, you inevitably become to believe that you must have these things, that you must not fail, that your loved ones must not die, that you must stay healthy and vigorous, and so on. You inevitably come to the belief that violation of these hopes constitutes a catastrophe. If the main focus of your life is increasing status, love, prosperity, comfort, and sensual pleasure, then death will inevitably seem like a catastrophe because death ends all of that. If you readers will realize that in the previous paragraph, I sound a lot like Albert Ellis, the psychologist primarily responsible for rational motive therapy. His fundamental idea is that irrational thinking is the primary cause of needless psychological suffering. One of the irrational thoughts he usually mentions is the idea that it is a catastrophe if your desires are not satisfied. Although Ellis and I share some common ground, it would not be correct to conclude that this book is intended as an expression of rational emotive principles. We disagree on a couple of key points. Ellis holds that desire for more is a logical error. I consider it instinctive and inborn. Ellis holds that a skilled therapist can correct most logical errors of thinking and thereby relieve most forms of unnecessary suffering. I believe it is much more difficult to oppose the desire for more. Ellis considers the desire for more to be one of several equally important causes of needless suffering. I consider it the fundamental cause of needless suffering. Striving for more is not fun. I play racquetball regularly. It's great fun. It requires endurance, strategy, coordination, speed, and precision. There is a lot of geometry involved because the ball may bounce off all four walls as well as the ceiling and floor. You have to be able to predict where the ball will land and be there waiting to hit it when it arrives. Certain shots give the ball spin, which causes it to bounce unpredictably, sometimes in ways that give you a good laugh. Every once in a while, the ball hits you in the back of the leg so hard it makes a brown-black bruise that lingers for weeks. Invariably, your opponent apologizes and treats you with kind concern. Invariably, you laugh it off and continue the game. It hurts like crazy, but you don't suffer. Sometimes I want to win. Sometimes I don't care. Sometimes I hope to win. Sometimes I know I have little hope of winning. Sometimes I play with people I would not want to socialize with, But even then, my opponents and I share pleasant, low-key companionship. I can think of only one thing that could spoil the game completely. If I ever felt that I must win, all the fun would instantly be destroyed. If the ball came off the wall at a funny angle, I would not be amused. Rather, I would be angry and frustrated. If the ball hurt me, I might feel angry or sorry for myself. I might become afraid of the ball. If I missed an easy shot, I would have intense unhappy feelings. If I could see that my opponent was better than me, my angry, frustrated, vulnerable feelings would make me very unhappy indeed. Playing the game of life is more interesting and more fun than playing the game of racquetball. Playing as if you must win spoils the game of racquetball and also spoils the game of life. Consider courtship, education, investment, home improvement, child rearing, employment, socializing, and other routine activities. They could be approached as an interesting, stimulating, companionable game. If they were approached as a must-win activity, the fun, the good fellowship are damaged, and if not, destroyed altogether. But that's one of the problems with the desire for more. It constantly whispers in your ear, "This is not a game. This is for keeps. This really matters. You must not fail." It's just a whisper, but it is persistent, and it is hard not to fall under its spell. I know that you don't always believe desire's whispering. Most people sometimes have fun in these activities, but honestly ask yourself how often you feel that you must win. Chances are it's very often. You aren't a freak or a fool for that. You are normal. I want to help you become exceptional. Don't misunderstand. This book is not intended as a consolation prize. I play racquetball to win. That is, I play with all the speed, strength, and concentration I can muster short of injury or severe exhaustion. It might seem that playing to win is identical to playing as if I must win. A little thought reveals they are quite different. I play to win, but I have just as much fun whether I win or lose. I often encounter psychotherapy clients who fail to utilize their native good sense and vigor. They don't play to win. Prior to treatment, it is a foregone conclusion that they will lose at love, friendship, education, or career. Typically, they have suffered disappointment or frustration that has made them afraid to compete effectively. Sometimes they feel they do not deserve to succeed. Such people certainly deserve compassion, reassurance, and assistance, but this way of life is no indication of wisdom. Ineffective living has nothing to do with wanting what you have. Wanting what you have means playing to win without feeling that you must win. The desire for more often does harm. The world is full of horror, and it's getting worse. Species, habitats, and non-renewable resources are disappearing at an appalling rate. Ethnic, religious, and nationalistic hatred is as common as it ever was. Warfare is becoming more cruel than ever, but no less common. Most human beings alive today are politically oppressed and economically exploited. Slavery and torture are widespread. Normal social life in prosperous countries is also full of horror. Crime is common, boredom is common, lies are common, manipulation and personal exploitation are common, child abuse and neglect are common, loneliness is common, depression and anxiety are common. Many people spend their lives incarcerated or enslaved by drugs or alcohol. Trace these horrors back to their roots and you will find that every one of them has been caused by someone's desire for more. The ultimate source of poverty, environmental destruction, war, crime, and all the rest is not stupidity, but greed. Greed does not exist in a culture, an economic system, or an era in history any more than a fish exists in an encyclopedia. Greed lives in the heart of individual human beings. I could talk for a week, maybe a month, citing all the examples I have seen of people who have done harm to themselves and the people that they love the most because of greed. People have wept bitterly in my office as they prepared to go to prison for taking things that didn't belong to them so that they can buy things that they didn't need. I can't count the number of times I've seen husbands plead with their wives for forgiveness after being caught in a pointless love affair that gave them very little joy. Much drug and alcohol abuse is a form of greed, and I can't count how many times I've seen mothers lose their children to a foster home or adoptive home because of this kind of greed. I can't count the number of teenagers I have known who were tormented by their own parents because their parents were greedy for the child to succeed in some endeavor that did not interest the child. I have interviewed murderers while the victim's blood was still wet on their clothing. Typically, murders arise from grudges, jealousy, petty resentments, theft, or drug deals. All of these are forms of greed. Resist the temptation to think that all of these incidents represent neurotic aberrations. They represent the unpleasant but universal elements of the human condition. The worst forms of harm are the ones that are outside of our immediate experience or invisible. Africa's Lake Victoria, one of the largest lakes in the world, which provides fish to feed 30 million people, is dying. The ozone layer is disappearing. The carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is rapidly increasing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of species become extinct each day. Trace each of these problems back to its roots, and you will find that each arises from the ordinary desires of ordinary individual human beings. W.H. Auden says, "Evil is unspectacular and always human and shares our bed and eats at our table." We want to have happy, healthy, vigorous children. We want friends and allies. We want to be admired. We want to have great sex with desirable partners. These are normal, ordinary desires. Yet having happy, vigorous children is not so easy. If the welfare of my child is threatened in some small way by a mishap or difference of opinion, it is easy to hate and fear the possibly innocent person who authored the threat. Desirable mates have other admirers, and it is natural to hate and fear them. Our competitors seem to use deception, so we feel justified in also deceiving. Having allies also means having enemies. Prosperity often comes at the expense of someone else's poverty. It is easy to believe that what I have rightfully belongs to me, regardless of how I came to possess it. It is equally easy to believe that someone who has more than me does not deserve it. Being admired means dominating someone else by virtue of being smarter, more productive, or more aggressive. Men and women betray mates who they love because they want more sexual variety, more income, more prestige, or more security. They want to have it all. People who succeed at having it all are widely admired. As Mark Twain said, "Make money and the world would conspire to call you a gentleman." The children, spouses, and friends they abandon and betray in order to get it all become mere footnotes to their lives. The wish to love and to be loved, or the fear that we will not be loved, can lead to harmful behavior almost as quickly as the desire for power or wealth. People overwhelm, humiliate, or terrify their children for the same ultimate reason that they protect, reassure, and educate them. They want to be sure that their children will prosper. The possibility that they will not prosper is unbearable. Yet children do not come with warranties. Some vigorous, smart young people find out that older, more dominant people don't play fair, so they adopt a whatever it takes attitude, get caught, and end up impoverished, disgraced, or imprisoned. Good people want to serve humanity as politicians. They learn that they must lie to win elections, and gradually they lose respect for the truth until they become a caricature of corruption, greed, and deceit they set out to oppose. The desire for more ignores spiritual longing. Because it is instinctive, the desire for more is relentless and insatiable. However, people often desire certain things besides wealth, status, and love, and not all desires are instinctive roots. Desires that do not arise from instinct may not be as universal or relentless as the desire for more. Nevertheless, such desires may still be a potent force in human affairs. One of the most prominent desires that does not fall under the heading of the desire for more is spiritual longing. Spiritual longing is known by many different names and is associated with many symbols, traditions, and prophets. It might just as easily be called the desire for transcendence. It has been described as the soul yearning to reunite with its creator. It has been described as longing for oneness, wholeness, or communion. Sometimes it takes a more philosophical or secular slant in the form of a wish to know the ultimate meaning of life. Few people entirely lack spiritual longing. How many purely secular societies, ancient or modern, do anthropologists know about? None. Some modern people try to dismiss spiritual longing as silly or unscientific, or a mere artifact of brain chemistry. But the longing does not vanish. It hides only to reappear at a different time or in a different form. When spiritual longing is not satisfied, the endless repetition of going to work so you can come home, so you can eat, so you can sleep, so you can go back to work, so you can keep your health insurance, so you can go to the doctor, so she can cure your minor illnesses, so you can keep working, so you can buy a bigger home and a nice car and send your children to college so they can get a job, so they can come home and eat and sleep, so that you can go back to work, and so on, seems like a macabre marathon dance that can only be escaped by dying. We call this predicament spiritual starvation. Spiritual starvation is a very real form of suffering. History is filled with examples of people who preferred severe pain, loss, or personal freedom, or even death to spiritual starvation. Consider, for example, martyrs and saints who would not consider renouncing their spiritual beliefs and practices regardless of the consequences. Monks and mystics from many religious traditions have considered spiritual starvation so painful that they have gladly renounced every pleasure and comfort in order to remedy it. In most pre-industrial societies, there has been no distinction between secular life and religious life. Ceremonies, celebrations, artistic expressions, healing practices, and even small matters like cooking and eating and grooming have simultaneously addressed secular and spiritual needs. In this way, pre-industrial people have been able to enjoy spiritual nourishment while going about the daily business of living. Oddly, though they lacked the physical comforts, political freedom, social mobility, and varied entertainments we enjoy, we might consider pre-industrial people lucky because their routine daily lives satisfied their spiritual longings. Sadly, although most modern people can be pretty sure of the necessity of a good education, a good job, good investments, a good spouse, and so on, most modern efforts to satisfy spiritual longing are confused and ambivalent, and people are uncertain about the benefits. Many Christians worship Jesus Christ without being sure whether he was the Son of God or not. Otherwise, many well-educated Christians often lack understanding of basic religious doctrines and have very little curiosity about them. People from a variety of religions worship God or gods despite their doubts regarding God's nature and God's intentions for humanity. People pray despite doubts regarding the nature and efficacy of prayer. When modern secular life and spiritual life do overlap, it is often because people hope to exploit divine resources in their quest for more. For example, many people associate religion primarily with the afterlife, on the assumption that God will finally satisfy their desires after death and that their gratification will continue after all eternity. Many people pray only when they are desperate or terrified or acutely in need of reassurance that death is not final. There are few atheists on plummeting airliners. It's perfectly understandable that people want to believe in a powerful, loving God who will protect them and grant them their fondest wishes. But spiritual longing is deeper and more complex than that. Even if you long ago stopped believing in that sort of God, you might still experience spiritual longing. Even atheists experience spiritual longing. Spiritual longing is better understood as the wish for certainty that we are living the right way, the wish for certainty that our shabby lives have some deep and lasting significance, the wish to know that our small, anonymous acts of courage and decency and self-sacrifice will somehow count and be remembered, the wish to know why we live and what we are supposed to do with our lives, the wish that somewhere among all the drones of our days we might find golden nuggets of eternal truth. The quest for more often becomes so consuming that very little time and energy remains for prayer, religious study, contemplation, meditation, or worship. It consumes so much of our attention that very little is left over for reverence. Even when our time and attention are available for these things, they are too often contaminated or subverted by the desire for more. Our culture is set up in a way that the desire for more and spiritual longing seem to contradict one another. We feel we face a devil's bargain. We might live reverentially at the expense of conventional success, or we might prosper in a state of spiritual starvation. Ultimately, most people choose the latter option. After all, the desire for more is instinctive. The carrot, the joy of wanting what you have. The following traditional Buddhist teaching story, sad and beautiful, eloquently shows how peace of mind can result from renouncing the desire for more. Once a distracted mother came to the all-compassionate one, the Buddha, with her dead babe in her arms, and besought him that it might be restored to life. He listened to her pleading, then sent her to fetch a mustard seed from a house where no one had died. She sought for long, in vain, and then returned and told him of her failure. My sister, thou hast found, the master said, searching for what none finds, that bitter balm I had to give thee. He thou lovest slept, dead on thy bosom yesterday. Today thou knowest the whole world weeps with thy woe. The grief which all hearts share grows less one more. The bitter balm that Buddha had to give the unfortunate woman was the understanding that no one avoids sorrow, humiliation, illness, pain, or death. She was in no shape to listen and understand. Rather, she had to learn from personal experience. Paradoxically, finding out that these things are inevitable made her feel better, not worse. Previously, she felt cruelly singled out by fate, which made her suffer unbearably. When her misunderstanding was relieved, her suffering resolved, though I would assume that some painful sorrow remained. Keep in mind the distinction between pain and suffering. Grasping the supreme importance of what she learned, the woman joined Buddha's order of monks, vowing to spend her life helping others resolve their needless suffering. Renunciation is not ordinarily a merry term or a popular one. When I greet an acquaintance with, "How are you?" I don't expect them to say, "Great, I want less than I ever have before." I don't think the National Association of Broadcasters will ever sponsor a television public service announcement reminding me that I already have far more than I need or deserve. Renunciation often evokes images of lonely, grim, sexually repressed medieval monks. Don't worry, that's not what I have in mind for you. A little thought reveals that the idea of renunciation is not quite so depressing as it first appears. Knowing that no one avoids sorrow, humiliation, pain, or death creates a foundation for universal, unconditional compassion. If we know that these things cannot be avoided, then we might try to compete, wish, hope, and fear a little less frantically, which could make life more fun. In other words, when we really get it that life will be painful at times, we become more inclined to stop and smell the roses. If planning, wishing, working, and worrying with sufficient determination could make it possible to avoid pain entirely, then only a fool would stop and smell the roses. Most ordinary situations can be experienced as deliciously pleasurable or as bitterly disappointing. It depends on how you evaluate them. The more you are enslaved by your desires, the more likely you are to find any given situation disappointing. Consider these two scenarios. Scenario number 1. A man wakes up early in the morning, a few minutes before he needs to arise. The cool morning air on his face contrasts pleasantly with the cozy warmth under the blankets. His limbs are still heavy with sleep. He sighs with pleasure as he invites gravity to pull him deeper into the embrace of the mattress, and he pulls the heavy blankets closer. The clock radio clicks on to play a sad, sweet, silly song he loved as a teenager and hasn't heard for years. It evokes sweet, sad nostalgia, which fills his chest and belly like a thick, warm liquid. As his wife dozes contentedly on his shoulder, he muses happily about the good times he has shared with her and the good times he anticipates in the future. To his delight, he realizes that her nipple is just touching the tip of his index finger. If he twitches his finger slightly, He can feel the nipple respond like a small friendly animal eager to play, though she is still asleep. A dim but pleasant wave of sexual desire rolls through his loins, then quickly subsides as his little girl wanders sleepily into the room, silently climbs into bed next to him, and dozes off without a word. His mind is filled with the perception of her beauty and gentleness. His 30-year-old AM clock radio, with a speaker the size of a penny, begins to play another song with amazing delicacy, a song he has never heard before, but that somehow resonates with the adoration he feels for the child that is now dozing on his other shoulder. Having risen a bit further, the sun catches the edge of the dusty old crystal hanging in the window. Several small, perfect rainbows appear on the wall 2 feet from his face. If he turns his head just right, one lands directly on the retina of his right eye, which transmits a pure field of saturated color directly to the center of his brain. He thinks, life is good. Life is very good. Scenario number 2. It's the same morning, the same circumstances. A new guy with a different way of thinking. He has a habit of attending to the things that he desires but does not possess. The cool morning air reminds him that his gas and electricity were turned off yesterday because he is behind on his bills. As he anticipates prying his reluctant, heavy limbs out of the bed, he thinks, oh God, today it's only Wednesday. Won't the weekend ever get here? He begins to daydream about how he would like to quit working forever, which reminds him of how much he resents those welfare bums who get a check from the government for staying in bed all day. As the clock radio clicks on, he hears the familiar tiny sound of its music. It was a disappointment when, as a teenager, he got it for Christmas from his cheapskate parents, and it has continued to be a disappointment every weekday morning since. It seems inconceivable that there has not been one time in the past 30 years that he hasn't had enough spare cash to purchase a really good clock radio. Perhaps he could get one that plays CDs, put it on the credit card. Thinking about his credit card debt gives him a hot feeling at the base of his skull. As his wife sleeps contentedly on his shoulder, he counts her chins and wrinkles. Good God, I think she's getting a second belly too. If she wasn't so damn contented, she might get motivated to lose some weight. He pulls his finger away when he perceives it touching her nipple. One thing might lead to another, and then they'd end up having that awful talk about their sex life again. Why can't she understand that if she wants sex and romance, she must look sexy and romantic? As he idly considers the possibility of pretending that she's Gina Davis and going for it anyways, his expensive little birth control failure wanders sleepily into the room. Having risen a bit further, the sun catches the edge of the dusty old crystal hanging in the window. If he owned this dump, he would replace that cracked, dirty old window. He could argue with the landlord about it, but then he might raise the rent. Better to keep a low profile. If only I could buy my own house. How can I have peace of mind when I don't even own my own home? He tries to close his eyes to block out the sunlight, but it's too bright. As he reluctantly flings back the covers to climb over his sleeping family, he thinks, life sucks. Life really sucks. These examples are hardly far-fetched, and the second one is all too common. They conveniently make a point that is otherwise hard to convey. Enjoyment of life's pleasures, small or great, do not necessarily arise from the satisfaction of desire. Just as often, desire hinders or destroys enjoyment. The man in the second scenario seems to invite the pain of wanting what he cannot have. Conversely, the renunciation of desires does not necessarily hinder profound enjoyment. The man in the first scenario enjoys that moment as much as he does because he has renounced the desire to have a pretty, slender, young wife, a large income, and his own home. I put renounce in quotation marks to indicate that I use the term in a specialized way. This man might plan cleverly and work hard because he wishes to buy a home someday, but he does not consider it something that he must achieve, nor would he willingly do harm in order to achieve it. It sometimes does happen that satisfaction of a great desire produces deep pleasure and excitement, but the effect is inconsistent and often brief. How many people spend years longing to own a really nice car only to find in the end that a really nice car gives them far less pleasure than they had expected? The joy of great sex seldom lingers for more than an hour or two, about the same duration as the pleasure evoked by a really good meal. The joy of a big promotion or financial windfall might last a few days. I once knew a man who nursed a profound, impossible sexual longing for many years. One day, quite by accident, he met attractive partners eager to participate in the activities he had hungered for every day since he was a teenager. When the great moment came, he became so filled with anxiety and disgust that he grabbed his clothes and fled. The very next day, he began to long for it all over again. It might seem monstrous or bizarre to suggest that a man shouldn't want to own his own home, that mothers shouldn't want their children to live forever, that workers shouldn't want to be paid well, that soldiers shouldn't want to be heroes, that old people shouldn't want to be remembered. It is indeed cruel and unwise to tell people that they shouldn't want such things. However, adults might independently choose to live in such a way that the desire for more gradually grows less insidious, relentless, and insatiable. If you know that the desire for more does cause needless suffering and interferes with joy, what do you do? Is it realistic to try and give up the desire for more the way people give up smoking? If you were to renounce the desire for more, would you lose the desire to eat, sleep, or breathe? What about the desire to provide for your family? What about the desire to go on living? If you are to renounce some desires but not others, which ones do you renounce? And how do you justify hanging on to the remainder? Suicide seems like a pretty effective way of renouncing desire. Is suicide the ultimate renunciation? What if you try to give up the desire for more but become lonely, bored, or depressed as a result? What about fun? Should you renounce the desire for fun? There is no way that all your desires will ever disappear. One way or another, you will always want to work, to laugh, to have fun, to fulfill your family and societal responsibilities. One way or another, you will always want to see the sun come up, hear the birds sing one more time. Renunciation means giving up the idea that you are entitled to more. It means giving up the idea that not getting more is a catastrophe. It means giving up the idea that if you don't always get more, you have failed in some way. It means giving up the idea that getting more is so essential that it is okay to harm yourself or others in order to succeed. The perennial philosophy. To say that the secret to happiness is to want what you have is to suggest that ordinary existence is rich and deep and sufficient unto itself. In chapter 1, I said, this is the precious present. Another word we might use is sacred. To want what you have is to think, act, and feel as if ordinary existence is sacred. Some philosophers might argue that ordinary existence is not inherently sacred, but that by living as if it is sacred, we might make it so. Others might argue that the sacredness is there all the time, but usually overlooked. I don't know who is right. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. The idea that ordinary existence is sacred has a long and respectable history. The idea and its history are best summarized by Aldous Huxley in his book, The Perennial Philosophy, first published in 1945. The book is still in print and highly regarded by religious scholars and philosophers. Huxley borrows the term perennial philosophy from Gottfried Leibniz. the 17th century philosopher and mathematician who observed that all religions, regardless of when or where they originated, seem to repeat certain fundamental ideas. Huxley exhaustively describes the elements of the perennial philosophy and quotes religious teachers of every faith in order to demonstrate the underlying similarities of their ideas. According to Huxley, the perennial philosophy has three essential elements. First, ordinary things, ordinary lives, and ordinary minds are made of divine stuff. Second, a chunk of the divine reality lies at the core of every living thing. Third, a person's single most important task is to discover the divinity of ordinary things, ordinary lives, and ordinary minds, and to discover her identity with the divine reality. Huxley suggests that the perennial philosophy was stated most clearly 2,500 years ago in the teaching of Buddha, but that since then it has been expressed repeatedly in every religious tradition and in all the principal languages of Europe and Asia. The perennial philosophy contrasts sharply with most popular contemporary religion. According to the perennial philosophy, the divine reality does not necessarily do anything. It is just there. It does not necessarily pluck some aircraft out of danger or hurl others to the ground. It did not necessarily create the universe, nor does it necessarily maintain the universe. According to the perennial philosophy, life after death is an unimportant question. The essential question is whether we will ever be fully alive before death. People accustomed to contemporary popular religion might doubt the value of religion based on the perennial philosophy. Some readers will ask, what good is a God like that? What good is a God that doesn't do anything? I think this question arises from a misunderstanding of what is meant by the divine reality, the phrase Huxley chooses. Many others might be substituted. Buddha spoke of the absolute or the unborn. We might employ the term supreme being. Jewish scriptures use a word for the deity that consists entirely of silent letters. And of course, God is an old standby. For convenience and clarity, I'll stick with Huxley's phrase. It is probably human nature to conceive of the divine reality as somehow having a human form and a human function, as though the divine reality were an infinitely powerful and loving king or father. Actually, I do it myself. It's no accident that the divine reality is often referred to as King of Kings, the Lord, our Father in Christianity or Judaism, and other religions, not to mention Divine Mother, Mother Nature, and other similar names for goddesses. I do not wish to quarrel with people who want to continue conceiving the divine reality in this manner, but I must point out some of the problems that such a conception can produce. Good fathers and good kings do protect us and try to grant at least some of our wishes. When we imagine that the divine reality has a similar nature, it is easy to spend our lives waiting for the divine reality to gratify us in a similar manner. In this way, the natural human religion impulse can cause us to spend our lives preoccupied with the desire for more and to suffer accordingly. There are other ways to conceive of the divine reality, however. These other ways are more likely to encourage renunciation instead of desire. They are more likely to encourage wanting what you have. The philosophy of wanting what you have is supported by an underlying assumption that there is beauty, meaning, truth, love, and mystery in the world at all times and under all circumstances. Although these things are sometimes hard to perceive or even to imagine. If I did not accept this assumption, I would have written a very different book, which I might have called Win or Die. Beauty, meaning, truth, love, and mystery do not just each add their separate share of goodness to life. The whole is far greater than the sum of its parts. Beauty plus meaning plus truth plus love plus mystery equals something awesome, nameless, and inconceivable. That something might be called the divine reality. When I imagine the divine reality, I picture the right hand of a huge, shimmering, human-like figure. The fingers of the hand are beauty, meaning truth, love, and mystery. I imagine that the other fingers, the other limbs, the internal organs, and the face are equally important forces, but ones that I cannot name or conceive of. The thing the great shimmering figure represents is the divine reality, recognized by the perennial philosophy. This conception of the divine reality encourages wanting what you have. And that is why wanting what you have can be much more than just a method of psychological self-help. In the end, wanting what you have is a profound form of worship. Some readers might still have trouble appreciating the value of divine reality that does not oversee human affairs the way a good king or father would. Another way of approaching the problem is to ask, what is the value of a meteor shower, a symphony, a good belly laugh, a poem, a bird's song, an act of selfless kindness, or a child's smile? These things are valuable because they quietly, persistently give life meaning. Not everyone can perceive the significance of a meteor shower or a symphony. Not everyone is capable of appreciating acts of selfless kindness or good belly laughs. People who are capable of appreciating these things are blessed. Those who are not capable of appreciating such experiences would be better off if they could learn how. If they cannot learn how, or do not try to learn how, then they are cursed in ways that they cannot comprehend. According to the perennial philosophy, the divine reality must be experienced directly. It cannot be explained or described. How would you describe a belly laugh in a world where laughter is unknown, or a symphony in a world where music has not yet been invented? Nevertheless, many people intuitively sense the divine reality and privately hope that someday they will know it. The following passage from This Is It by Alan Watts, New York, Collier, 1958, summarizes the statements of many people who have reported direct experience with the divine reality. All right, Alan Watts' impression. To the individual in this state of mind, it appears as vivid and overwhelming certainty that the universe, precisely as it is at this moment, is so completely right as to need no explanation or justification beyond what it simply is. Existence not only ceases to be a problem, the mind is so wonderstruck at the self-evident and self-sufficient fitness of things as they are, including what would ordinarily be thought the very worst, that it cannot find any word strong enough to express the perfection and beauty of the experience. Its clarity sometimes gives the sensation that the world has become transparent or luminous, and its simplicity the sensation that it is pervaded and ordered by the supreme intelligence. At the same time, it is useful for the individual to feel that the whole world has become his own body, and that whatever he is has not only become, but always has been, what everything else is. It is not that he loses his identity to the point of feeling that he actually looks out through other eyes, becoming literally omniscient, but rather that his individual consciousness and existence is a point of view temporarily adopted by something immeasurably greater than himself. The central core of the experience seems to be the conviction or insight that the immediate now, whatever its nature, is the goal and fulfillment of all living. We are approaching the chapters that give detailed instructions for the systematic practice of compassion, attention, and gratitude. But these instructions will make better sense after we explore the nature of instinctive desires more thoroughly. I have described the harm that it does, but I have not yet explained its origin and natural purpose. These are the topics of the next chapters. Chapter 3: Human Nature. Imagine the following conversation between Milton and Roger. They are roommates and buddies in their mid-20s. They're watching a movie on TV, which, not surprisingly, features a gorgeous female actress, about 25 years old. Milton says, "Oh God, she's so beautiful. I'd give anything to spend a weekend in a motel room with her. Anything." Roger says, "Okay, what would you give?" "I'd give her one of my kidneys." "All right, both my kidneys." Uh, but only afterwards. If I gave them before, I wouldn't be able to enjoy the weekend. I'd die a happy man. Milton, I want to ask you something. Why do you get so excited thinking about that? You don't think she's awesome? Oh, sure, she's really cute. No, I mean, why do you get excited thinking about doing the horizontal mambo with beautiful women you see on TV? You already get plenty of sex with nice looking girls. Hey, I've been fair with those girls. They're nice, but they're not, well, they're nice, but I'm not, well, anyways, I'm still a free man. I'm not criticizing you, Milton. I'm just wondering why you're so, blasé about nice women who like you and so hot for this woman on TV you never met and wouldn't have a prayer with. Uh-oh, you're taking another humanistic psychology class, aren't you, Roger? No, Milton, I'm not. Actually, I'm just wondering. Well, it's sort of a stupid question, isn't it? It's sort of asking a monkey why he likes bananas. I think she's gonna take a shower. Ooh. Well, it's not a very good explanation. Monkeys need to eat. Besides, you aren't exactly starving for sex. Geez, Roger, why do you ask such dumb questions? It's human nature, that's all. It's just doing what comes natural. Birds gotta sing, bees gotta sting, or make honey, or whatever. And guys need beautiful babes like her. I know I'll probably end up marrying Anna or Meryl, but hey, what's the harm in dreaming? No harm, Milton. No harm. I do it too. That's kind of why I'm asking. Saying that it's human nature doesn't really explain anything, does it? I mean, what's human nature? Well, I can't say what it is, but I know it when I see it. Now imagine this one. It involves Kimberly and Tanya, two middle class married women who have known each other for years. They are in their mid 30s, each with a couple of young children. They run into each other at the supermarket. Tanya says, Kimberly, hi, what's new? Kimberly, oh, hello, Tanya. Let's see, what is new? I guess the big news at our house these days is that we are getting new furniture and we're redecorating a little. We got this big refund on our taxes and we just sort of went nuts. Well, I did mostly. Ted is going along with it, but you know how guys are. Ted told me once we should carpet the house with AstroTurf to save time and money. What are you getting? I'm really pretty excited. You'll have to come over and see after I get all the new wallpaper up. It's a mess right now. We found this place in San Francisco that has the most fabulous wallpaper, so we're doing that. We're getting a sofa and a love seat that are, the kind of things you see in magazines and you never thought you would really have for yourself. We're getting rid of that awful coffee table. You remember that one? And we're getting a new dining set. A couple of things too, and a carpet to die for. The great thing is, we can actually afford it. I can hardly wait to show it to you. Would you mind if I ask you a stupid question, Kimberly? Sure, why not? What was wrong with the stuff you had before? It wasn't really worn out or ugly. I always thought you had a nice house. Well, Tanya, there was nothing wrong with it. It's just that, well, the new things are so much nicer. I'm sure they are very nice, but why bother? You're going to get used to the new things in a month or two, and then you'll hardly notice them anymore. Why not just save yourself the money and the trouble? Tanya, it's just so exciting. When you get it all just the way you wanted and it looks so great. Come on, Tanya. You're the same way. I remember last year when you sponge painted your living room. I know, I'm the same way. I'm just wondering why we care so much. Tanya, you're my favorite navel gazer. Who knows? Who cares? It's fun. It's the main thing. It's just human nature. Kimberly, well, okay, but is human nature just an excuse to buy new furniture? What is human nature? I mean, everybody seems to have a different idea about what it really is. I don't know. I always thought philosophy classes were boring. I'll call you soon. Or why don't you just stop by on Monday after you drop off the kids? If you don't mind annoying your friends and family, try asking them why they care about new cars, golf scores, job promotions, nice clothes, computer upgrades, fancy restaurants, and so on. There are two odd things about conversations like this. First, they almost never occur. People probably won't hate you for asking questions like this, but they will consider such questions weird. There are certain things in life that just go without saying. Second, if you ask people questions like this, they rarely have good answers. Even very smart, well-educated people may be clueless, unless they have studied recent developments in evolutionary psychology. In the end, when people are asked questions like this, they resort to doing what comes naturally or human nature. This is odd, too, because they were probably taught in school that there's no such thing as human nature. I was. They don't seem to believe it, and neither do I. Chances are you were also taught in school that human beings are infinitely flexible, that people are theoretically capable of almost any imaginable way of life. You may have been taught that all other animals have instincts, but that instinct is a negligible force in human nature because human beings can think and remember and learn from one another in a way that other animals can't. There is a good chance you have also read books that said so. Almost everyone believed this until about 20 years ago. There is no such thing as human nature, and it is about the same all over the world and at every time in history, and it is not very different from chimpanzee nature, gorilla nature, or baboon nature. I'm going to explain to you what human nature is and how it got that way. It's a complex subject, so I'll have to leave out a lot of details. These won't be only my ideas. In the past 20 years, biologists specializing in animal behavior and anthropologists and psychologists with an evolutionary perspective on their subjects have assembled a vast body of scientific research that supports this position. Consider the following 12 phenomena. Of all the bad things that can happen to a person, the death of a child is generally considered the worst, and children recover from the loss of a parent far more easily than parents recover from the loss of a child. All over the world, men are more likely than women to abandon, neglect, or mistreat their children, and adopted children are more likely to be abused or abandoned by either parent than natural children. Emotions are conveyed by similar facial expressions all over the world. All people in all places are wary of snakes and spiders, but they are often blasé about greater dangers like toxic waste and drunk driving. People everywhere are intensely interested in matters of kinship. They keep track of who their relatives are, where they are, and how they are doing. All over the world and at all times in history, people have abhorred sexual relations between close relatives, parents and children, grandparents and children, siblings, often first cousins, etc. People recognize various forms of status in every society, and all people dread loss of whatever social status they have. Women everywhere, including modern feminists, have always been attracted to relatively dominant and prosperous men. In almost every society on earth, past or present, men are very interested in casual couplings with women, while women are very selective in choosing their sexual partners. Mature men everywhere generally prefer to marry younger women. In nearly every society ever studied, men try to defeat other men in athletic competition, and champion athletes are considered desirable romantic partners by large numbers of women. Polygamy, one husband with two or more wives, has been common in many cultures, whereas polyandry, one wife with two or more husbands, has been quite rare. Why are these things so? You might not like this list. You might question some of my generalizations. Though, if you check the facts further, you will learn that they are true. Take a look at for further reading, pages 261 and 265. You might think of contrary examples. There are a few, but not many. You might suspect that I have ulterior motives for asking why these things are so. Maybe you worry that I think people should be this way. Maybe you worry that I present these statements because I am a heterosexual white male who thinks women should be subordinate to men, or that homosexuality should be condemned, or that certain ethnic groups ought to continue dominating certain other ethnic groups, or that rich people deserve to be rich, or that poor people deserve to be poor. In fact, I don't think things should be this way. If I did, I wouldn't have written this book. I don't think things must be this way. I ask why these things are so to make only one point. It is impossible to explain them, or dozens of others like them, without resorting to human nature and instinct. Try looking at it this way. What would human life be like if people only had rational feelings about sex? If they had children only for logical reasons? If there was no such thing as social status, or if people were unconcerned about it? If people did not compete with each other in various ways? If sexual jealousy did not exist? If people were unconcerned about physical attractiveness? If people only wanted enough wealth to survive? If parents did not form passionate attachments to their children? If people were unconcerned about kinship? If you are an idealistic and imaginative person, you might think at first that the world would be better this way. But if you reflect upon it further, you may see that such a world would be so alien that it is very difficult to conceive of it. There has never been any culture on earth that lived this way. The way of living that I suggest, that is, wanting what you have in accordance with the principles of compassion, attention, and gratitude, is contrary to human nature. It is human nature to want what you don't have. To have much hope of succeeding at wanting what you have, you must understand what you are up against. If you understand it, your determination may be stronger, and you may be more resourceful when the going gets rough. To understand human nature and how it got to be the way it is, you have to understand a little bit about evolution and instinct. Humans get their natural inclinations in exactly the same way that daffodils, earthworms, groundhogs, lions, and chimpanzees get theirs. Reproductive success in animals. Genes determine instincts, just as they determine all other inborn characteristics like the size and shape of your nose, the color of your eyes, hereditary talents, hereditary diseases, and so on. If the rest of this chapter is to be comprehensible, we must briefly consider how genes are transmitted from one generation to the next. An unfortunate historical accident causes people to think survival of the fittest whenever the subject of evolution comes up. All modern animal scientists find the expression offensive and misleading. It implies that the biggest, strongest, most aggressive animal is the one that survives and reproduces, and it tends to emphasize the aggressive male while giving short shrift to the tough, resourceful female. Nature does not work that way at all. Size, strength, and aggressiveness are just as likely to hinder survival as it is to aid it. Intelligence is not necessarily a big help either, because intelligence requires brains, and brains require lots of nutrition and are vulnerable to heat and cold, disease, and injury. Consider some of the animal families not exactly noted for their large brains that have survived for eons in large numbers. Ants, cockroaches, and fish, for example. Furthermore, when it comes to evolution, survival means nothing. It's reproduction that counts. Extraordinary success in every other area of life is evolutionarily inconsequential unless any animal passes its genes on to the next generation by reproducing, helping its offspring survive, or helping its relatives reproduce. Some readers may take this to mean that men and women who don't reproduce, including gay men and lesbians, are evolutionary failures. This is a serious misconception. I am describing the mechanisms of evolution, not the ultimate purpose of life. Consider that the earth is probably overpopulated. It is silly to think of childless people as, quote, failures. Additionally, it would be incorrect to conclude from these facts that childless people are unhappy. There is no evidence that childless men or women or couples are less happy than the others. In fact, childless couples report higher levels of life satisfaction. For an instinct to be passed from one generation to the next, it must support reproductive success. That is, the instinct must support perpetual survival of the individuals or families that possess it. For example, if you and your relatives have an instinctive inclination to cuddle with grizzly bears, you and your relatives will soon be gone, and the genes that produce that instinct will disappear from the gene pool. People instinctively inclined to run away from grizzly bears are more likely to survive and reproduce, and that instinct will be passed along to future generations. This is a very simplified example. Thousands of instincts and physical characteristics are constantly evolving in every species of animal. Each animal is likely to have a mix of slightly favorable and slightly unfavorable characteristics. Nevertheless, in the long run, the favorable characteristics will inevitably spread through the population and the unfavorable ones will disappear. The strange result of these simple principles is that animals, including humans, act as if they want their genes to be passed on from one generation to the next forever. You might say that their genes make them do it. If an animal's ancestors hadn't inherited and passed along instincts that cause it instinctively to act as if it cares about ultimate reproductive success, then its ancestors would have been less reproductive successfully, and that animal would never have been born in the first place. We must consider what animals must do to achieve reproductive success. Although the details are complex, the essential elements are quite simple. First, they must survive to reproductive age. Then, they must attract a willing mate. Mates with good genes are more desirable than mates with maladaptive or unhealthy genes. In order to attract a willing mate, they must themselves appear to possess good genes. Females must be healthy and well-fed enough to withstand the demands of gestation and lactation until offspring are self-sufficient. Possessing a territory rich in food, nesting sites, and other essentials is quite helpful in this regard, but of course other animals of the same species will want to use the same territory for the same purposes, so they must be able to defend it. For a female, attracting a male who will help feed her and her young is also quite an asset, if the young of that species are helpless and require care. The reproductive success of males improves if they are able to attract a mate who will feed and protect the young with particular effectiveness. Producing a large number of young is more conducive to reproductive success than producing a small number of young, assuming sufficient resources are available. Hierarchy and territory are the two basic methods that animals use to demonstrate to potential mates that they are healthy and possess good genes. Many animals employ some combination of the two methods. Each method requires a bit of explanation. Most animals are territorial to some degree. The size of a territory depends on the species and the environment. Sometimes an individual defends a territory. Sometimes a group defends a territory. When it's a group, the group usually contains many close relatives. A small fish might claim and defend a territory for a few square feet. A grizzly bear or a troop of monkeys might claim and defend a territory covering several square miles. Typically, an animal or clan claims a territory large and bountiful enough to provide food to ensure reproductive success, yet small enough that its borders can be defended from interlopers of the same species. Environments rich in food supplies produce smaller territories. Territorial combat does not often result in death or severe injury to either of the combatants. Once it is clear that the animal has the strength and skill necessary to defeat the other, the weaker animal makes some sign of submission and slinks away, surrendering part or all of its territory accordingly. The ability to claim and defend territory is strong circumstantial evidence of fitness. The inability to claim and defend territory is strong circumstantial evidence of lack of fitness. Once again, resist the temptation to associate fitness with size, strength, or aggressiveness. Subtle things like the ability to survive famine or resist parasites are far more important. Other animals of the same species instinctively recognize this and respond accordingly. Therefore, males who claim bountiful territories are considered highly desirable mates by females. It usually doesn't work the other way around because males tend to mate indiscriminately, whereas females are typically quite selective. This is because sperm requires little energy to manufacture and coitus only takes a minute. Males have little to lose by indiscriminate mating, and very successful males can theoretically produce a huge number of offspring. Indiscriminate mating favors reproductive success in males of most species. In contrast, pregnancy, birth, and lactation make females vulnerable to hunger, disease, and predators, and each pregnancy requires a substantial chunk of a female's lifespan. Therefore, females can produce only a relatively small number of offspring in their lifetime. High standards in mate selection support reproductive success for females of most species. Animals that live in social groups form dominance hierarchies. The term status is used interchangeably with dominance here. Some animals live in social groups year-round and form hierarchies accordingly. Other animals live solitary territorial lives for part of the year and then congregate during certain seasons for the purpose of forming hierarchies and mating. High-status males get their pick of the females, though they tend to prefer high-status females. Females, in turn, compete with each other to get access to high-status males, food for themselves and their offspring, the best nesting sites, and so on. Almost all females eventually mate. In most species, only the high-status males mate. The others wish to, but are driven off by the dominant males. Generally, males compete with males, and females compete with other females, though in some species it may be that females and males compete with each other for status. Just as with territories, combat is the primary method of establishing which animals will be dominant and which will be subordinate. This isn't necessarily true in gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. Every animal in the social group understands who has defeated or is likely to defeat whom in combat. The hierarchy is an efficient means for establishing and advertising fitness while eliminating the necessity for every animal to fight every other animal. Just as with territories, combat for dominance rarely results in death or serious injury. The combat ends when the defeated animal acknowledges the dominance of the victor. In some species, wolves, birds, and humans, for example, the young are helpless and remain so for a long time. Males and females in such species need to cooperate to some degree in order to feed and protect the young. These animals tend to form pair bonds or small family groups that will endure anywhere from one mating season to a lifetime, depending on the species and the environment. Human babies are helpless for a very long time, so the formation of pair bonds and small family groups is especially important in human societies. Altruism. Altruism is a fancy word for kindness or charity. In animals, it occurs in two forms: kin altruism and reciprocal altruism. Kin altruism refers to charity towards relatives. It is the more obvious of the two forms of altruism, and it occurs in a wide variety of animal species, probably in most species. It is the very foundation of bee and ant society. Worker bees and ants are sterile. They are motivated to work and even to sacrifice their lives because they are very closely related to the queen and her offspring. Its evolutionary mechanism is obvious. Your close relatives carry many of your distinctive genes. Charity towards relatives can help them achieve reproductive success, which in turn passes some of your distinctive genes along, including genes inclining subsequent generations to be charitable towards their relatives. A few animal species practice a more complex form of altruism called reciprocal altruism. Two or more animals will work as a team in order to advance their survival and their mutual status in the social group. Each partner understands that the other will come to his or her aid if challenged by a rival. They may also share food or mates or other forms of assistance. This form of altruism can exist only in the animals able to recognize a large number of individuals and to recall past dealings with each other. Reciprocal altruism has been best documented in chimpanzees and some other ape species and human beings, of course, but it may occur to a lesser degree in other species. Among chimpanzees and other close human relatives that live in large social groups, the ability to form successful alliances clearly contributes to reproductive success. We also know that amongst these animals, the inability to enforce order in the social group is a source of status for many animals, as is specialized knowledge that helps the group survive and prosper. For example, chimpanzees, who know where to find food in times of famine, how to avoid predators, how to succeed in combat with other groups, and so on, are usually accorded high status by the others. When animals engage in reciprocal altruism, three things inevitably happen. Some animals inevitably cheat, that is, certain animals receive favors but then fail to return the favor at an appropriate time. The cheaters seem to expect retribution, and the cheated animals seem to experience an emotion similar to what humans call moral outrage. Cheating, fear of retribution, and moral outrage have been observed repeatedly in chimpanzees, and they probably occur in other species as well. At first, reciprocal altruism seems like the nicest thing that evolution ever did. There is no question that much of what modern people call good or decent arises from reciprocal altruism. Nevertheless, if we look at nature more carefully and objectively, it becomes apparent that wherever we find reciprocal altruism, we also find cheating, guilt, and moral outrage. We should also remember that reciprocal altruism often involves two or more individuals teaming up to defeat a mutual enemy. Such an arrangement tends to increase the anger that the partners in an alliance feel for their adversaries. Chimpanzees are more closely related to humans than horses are related to zebras. Human DNA is 98.4% identical to chimpanzee DNA. Gorilla DNA is almost as similar, and orangutan DNA is not far behind. Humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor about 3 million years ago. If instinctively motivated, reciprocal altruism, cheating, and moral outrage have existed in species quite similar to us for at least 3 million years. It seems almost certain that they also have instinctive roots in human beings. Wealth, status, and love. It is not exactly correct to say that human beings and other animals instinctively strive for reproductive success. It is more accurate to say that human beings and animals strive for the prerequisites to reproductive success. When they do that, reproductive success takes care of itself. For example, bears strive to establish a territory, eat a lot during the summer and fall, survive hibernation, and find a desirable mate during mating season. They nurture and protect the resulting cubs until they are ready for independence. Bears pursue each goal in the appropriate place and time. The net result is reproductive success, but this is an abstraction invented by scientists. The bears are just doing what comes naturally. It works about the same way for humans. People strive for the prerequisites to reproductive success, often with little concern for reproduction. That's why many people aren't necessarily distressed if they don't have children. That's why they sometimes have sex in ways that couldn't possibly produce pregnancy, and that's why the existence of happy, childless people, gay men or lesbian women, does not contradict evolutionary psychology. On the other hand, if people are unable to achieve the prerequisites to reproductive success, they are usually very unhappy. That tends to confirm the truth of evolutionary psychology. Humans have complicated lives. Their reproductive strategies vary quite a lot depending on their environment and culture. Underlying all this complexity are a few simple factors. The main prerequisites to reproductive success in humans are wealth, status, and love. Obviously, these are not entirely distinct. Wealth often brings status. Status often begets wealth. Being loved is a form of status, and so on. I'll explain each briefly. Wealth. Wealth takes many forms. Most pre-industrial cultures don't use money quite the way we do. It's not because they are ignorant. It's because money is meaningless if you live among a small group of hunter-gatherers. There is nothing to exchange it for within the group because food and other necessities are gathered as needed. Neighboring groups would not be interested in the money either. So if one needed to trade with them, one would have to barter. Many pre-industrial cultures seem happier and more peaceful than our own because their way of life limits the amount of wealth an individual can accumulate. When wealth is calculated in sweet potatoes, for example, they will rot if you accumulate too many, or storage space will be limited. A migratory way of life also severely limits the accumulation of wealth. You can't carry much stuff when you have to move from place to place. Nevertheless, humans have often accumulated various forms of wealth other than money. In many societies, individuals or families might own grazing rights, vegetable patches, tobacco gardens, and so on. Some individuals might work harder than others and thereby accumulate more land or grazing rights than others, or more tobacco, yams, or sheep, for instance, than they can actually consume. In societies that do not farm, some hunters might be capable of bringing home far more meat than others because they are stronger, smarter, healthier, or more industrious. Excess meat is given away, but the hunter can expect some kind of reciprocation if he ever needs it. Some traditional societies do develop money-like mechanisms such as beads, shells, bits of precious metals, tobacco, rare feathers, fine weapons, and so on. These forms of wealth might be traded for goods or favors or used either as dowries or as payment for wives, depending on courtship customs. Under hunter-gatherer circumstances, the ability to accumulate more wealth than the others in your group is indirect evidence that you have good genes to pass on to a mating partner. This may not be true in modern times, but our genes haven't figured it out and won't for hundreds of generations to come. This is also true if your family members have accumulated wealth that they are willing to share with you, since you and your relatives have many genes in common. Additionally, accumulated wealth is conducive to your own survival and increases the likelihood that your children will survive. Humans have been accumulating wealth long enough that instinctive mechanisms almost certainly encourages us to do it and to admire others who do it. Status. Among humans, status is a complex matter. It can be hard to define precisely, though all adults and older children in every known society recognize it in similar ways and conform their actions to its dictates. Essentially, status is a question of who makes the rules, who gives orders, and who takes them, and who gives praise and who receives it, who controls access to commonly held resources, etc. In relatively militaristic hunter-gatherer societies, high status sometimes requires the ability to defeat one's rivals in combat, though this is not universally true. In some cases, feeble old men or women enjoy the highest status in a society because many stronger, younger people will support them if they are challenged. All individuals in all pre-industrial human societies recognize status and usually agree on how much status each individual is entitled to. In modern industrial societies, it gets more complicated, as I'll explain. All human societies have some system of indicating relative status with clothing, ornaments, rituals, language, and other means. Unusually attractive, strong, well-coordinated people are usually accorded some status just by virtue of their appearance because it suggests a high level of resistance to disease and parasites, good nutrition, an uninjured brain, and desirable genes. Contrary to many humanistic ideals, all societies in all places generally agree on what constitutes an attractive female or male form or face. The main exception to this rule is that, within certain limits, thinness is considered more attractive in societies in which food is plentiful, and plumpness is considered more attractive in societies where food is scarce. Even then, men in all societies tend to desire women whose waists are about 30% narrower than their hips. It turns out that hip-to-waist ratio is a strong predicator of biological fertility. However, appearance is one of the least important aspects of status. It counts most in situations where people do not know each other well, like in singles bars. People in ancestral societies tend to live in small, self-sufficient social groups, so they rarely found themselves in such situations. Generally, high-status individuals have developed a long track record of actions that benefit the social group. In warlike societies, sometimes battle enhances status. In societies that depend on hunting for protein, success in hunting enhances status. Societies that depend primarily on gathering food will accord high status to people particularly effective in locating nutritious fruits, berries, edible plants, insects, and so on. In societies that depend on certain tools or implements or agricultural techniques, mastery of these crafts brings status. The willingness and energy to do favors for others often enhances status. Skills in healing, storytelling, music, dance, or art, resolving conflicts within the group, or other socially useful talents usually confers status. In modern societies, people compete in multiple status hierarchies simultaneously. Some might have high status at the tennis club because of superior athletic ability, medium status at the office based on moderately good performance on behalf of the company, and low status in his extended family based on his irritating, argumentative personality. Ironically, modern people may put more emphasis on physical appearance than their primitive ancestors did, simply because they are frequently encountering people they know little or nothing about. Just as with horses, wolves, or chimpanzees, high status within a human living group invariably confers benefits likely to be associated with reproductive success. Even if they are not the richest members of the group, high status individuals are the best nourished. They get easiest access to healing herbs and ceremonies. High status men have a much easier time getting sexual access to women, and they are often the ones with whom high status women will mate with. In turn, high status women successfully demand special favors for their many suitors. The children of high status men and women are better fed, better educated, and better protected, and are the least likely to be attacked or abused by other members of the group. High status men and women are most likely to be protected and assisted by others during times of crisis. Love. To be blunt, love primarily refers either to kin altruism or reciprocal altruism. It's a big advantage in life to have a big loving family and to enjoy good relations with all of them. They can chase off your enemies, feed you when you are hungry, take care of you when you are sick, help you with your kids, and so on. That's kin altruism. In the same way, it's a big advantage in life to have lots of good friends. They will help you in many of the same ways that family will help you, though there will be a stronger expectation that you will repay them by helping them out when they need it. That's reciprocal altruism. What about romantic love and sexual love? You can think of romantic and sexual partnership as a specialized form of reciprocal altruism with a little extra kick from instinctively motivated sexual excitement. You gratify me and I'll gratify you. In return, you help me achieve reproductive success and I'll help you. Once babies are born, kin altruism is a factor too, since you share mutual genetic interests in helping the kids achieve reproductive success. Beyond that, kin altruism and reciprocal altruism can get you a desirable romantic partner. If you have good relations with a big family, particularly if your family also has some status or wealth, that makes you a more desirable mating partner than you would be otherwise. The same goes for friendships. Also, a big, successful family or large group of prosperous or high status friends can provide you opportunities to get you your own wealth and status that might otherwise have been hard to achieve. This brief and practical description might not seem to do justice to the deep feelings evoked by romantic love. Romantic love takes on particular intensity in modern industrial cultures, perhaps by default because other forms of reciprocal altruism and kin altruism are disappearing. In any case, reciprocal altruism is often associated with the deepest human emotions: love, tenderness, jealousy, outrage, loyalty, and generosity, among others, even though it is a highly pragmatic arrangement. Sweet success. Here is an analogy that may help you understand the instinctive desire for wealth, status, and love. All people consider sugar sweet. If they don't learn to think it is so, that reaction is inborn. Yet to call sugar sweet is to say nothing about sugar. It says something about people. Specifically, it says that human beings and their ancestors for thousands of generations were more likely to thrive and reproduce successfully if they ate a lot of sweet fruits. People strongly attracted to sweet fruits were more likely to survive, and they passed this instinctive attraction on into the future. This instinct causes us to experience sweetness when we eat sugar. In the same way, we are instinctively repelled by the bitter taste of fruits and berries that are toxic to us. These fruits and berries do not taste bad to animals who can eat them safely. Wealth, status, and love are sweet to us for the same reason that sugar is sweet to us. We hunger for these things because they helped our hunter-gatherer ancestors achieve reproductive success. Loss of wealth, status, love, or health is bitter to us. Loss of children is bitterest of all. Our ancestors associated these events with reproductive failure. This is a productive analogy. In modern times, sugar is available to us in quantities that our ancestors would never have dreamed of. Consequently, we have trouble with obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay. Because sugar has been available to the average person in large quantities for only a few generations, our instincts have not evolved to the point where eating healthfully is natural, and it won't be for thousands of years. We must use our intellect to understand the harm that sugar can do, and we must use our willpower to say no to its temptation. In the same way, modern society offers many recent innovations, including guns, money, credit cards, factories, schools, computers, clothing, furniture, and self-improvement techniques for which our instincts are completely unprepared. These greatly intensify the competition for wealth, status, and love. The distance between the richest and poorest people, the highest status and lowest status people, the most loved and the least loved people in traditional societies is not great. In our society, these distances have become grotesquely vast. This in turn causes grief, greed, disappointment, depression, crime, hatred, warfare, and environmental destruction on a scale undreamed of amongst our ancestors. Once again, because our instincts do not prepare us for these problems, we either solve them with our wills and our intellects, or we won't solve them at all. So far, we aren't solving them at all. I hope this book will help us with this at least a little. However, modern society is not the main problem. After all, our ancestors were so driven to accumulate wealth, status, and love that they eventually invented agriculture, cities, writing, school, assembly lines, television, and all the rest. The fundamental problem is that from an evolutionary perspective, there is no such thing as enough reproductive success. Amongst humans, no instincts tell us that we have accumulated enough status, wealth, or love, not to mention too much status or wealth or love. To the contrary, such an instinctive mechanism would contradict the basic principles of evolution. The explanation is simple. The nature of the gene pool is determined entirely by animals who leave the most numerous and successful offspring, regardless of the long-term consequences of doing so. Imagine that some grizzly bears developed an instinct that told them to stop eating a lot and to cease vigorously defending their territory after they produced, say, 4 healthy cubs, because after all, 4 cubs is plenty. In the short run, their descendants would survive, but over many generations, their descendants would eventually be replaced by the more numerous descendants of other grizzly bears whose instincts told them to keep on eating, defending territory, and so on, no matter how many healthy cubs they had already produced. So it is with humans. If at any point in our evolutionary history, certain people developed an instinctive feeling that a modest amount of wealth, status, and love was enough, the genes that produced that instinctive feeling would gradually disappear from the gene pool. We are all the descendants of many thousands of generations of people who were instinctively driven to keep striving for more wealth, more status, and more love throughout their lifetimes, regardless of how much they had already achieved. You and I and every other person alive today have inherited those instincts. The great problem modern humans must come to terms with is that all people instinctively desire limitless wealth, love, and status. These desires are particularly insidious because people are unaware of wanting limitless wealth, love, and status. They just want to do what comes naturally. which is to get just a little more wealth, a little more love, or just a little bit more status, on the assumption that satisfaction is just around the corner. The exceptions. If you don't want to believe in evolutionary psychology, you can think of many ways to challenge it. What about homosexuality? What about adoption? What about charity and kindness to non-kin in cases where there is no hope of reciprocation? What about people who have no desire to reproduce? What about people who voluntarily take religious vows of poverty, chastity, and humility? What about incestuous marriages within the royal families in certain cultures, or fathers who coerce their daughters into incestuous intercourse? Sexual relations between very close relatives is reproductively disadvantageous because they are likely to produce genetically defective offspring. All mammals have instinctive mechanisms to help them avoid incest. What about child abuse and neglect? What about killing kin? Evolutionary scientists have considered these phenomena and have plausible explanations supported by research data consistent with the point of view presented in this chapter. The book recommended for further reading on pages 261 and 265 will address these questions and others like them. What about socialization? What about childhood experience? I don't mean to deny the importance of childhood experience, culture, or learning, nor would any other sensible person. Obviously, I do not read or speak English by instinct. Instinct tells me nothing about how to use a computer, and my instinct does not tell me specifically how to respond to my 3-year-old son who is angrily screaming in his bedroom at the moment. Culture and family traditions tell me how to do these things and a million others. Evolution illuminates people's ultimate motives, not the details of their lives. Insatiable craving for more is not a crime, nor a sin, nor a character flaw. It is universally human. No one lacks it. A few people learn how to combat it, but you can't easily combat it until you understand it. The foregoing analysis is intended to help you understand your own instinctive cravings, not to condemn you or anyone else. Attentive readers may notice an apparent contradiction in this chapter. If what I say about human nature is true, then why would anyone write this book? Why would anyone read it? Obviously, some human behavior and feelings contradict instinctive strivings. A huge body of religious literature describes this phenomenon, and it can be seen amongst humanists and philanthropists and in occasional unselfish acts, small or heroic, that occur from time to time. I do not wish to deny this reality. Rather, I wish to celebrate it and help make it happen more often. Why is it possible to want what you have given the relentless push of instinct in the other direction? We have sufficient intellectual capacity that we can ignore or override our instinctive inclinations if we have a good enough reason. People learn to handle snakes and spiders without fear. People learn to restrain themselves until they put on the condom or the wedding ring. People learn to not eat as much as they want to eat and to stay away from addictive substances that make them feel good. They learn not to drink poisoned water, even if they are thirsty and it tastes good. In similar ways, people can learn to want what they have. There are people who regard obsession with wealth and status as a cultural disease spread by males, heterosexuals, Caucasians, or Judeo-Christians. They point to Native Americans, for example, as people who lived in non-competitive, peaceful, non-hierarchical societies where wealth didn't count for much. However, if you take a closer look at any traditional society, you will find many instances of competition for desirable mates and status, and cheating and moral outrage and sexual jealousy. They competed for wealth, status, and love just as vigorously as people in industrialized societies. It's less obvious because they often didn't in ways unfamiliar to us. What's to be done about instinct? It isn't safe to assume that religion, self-improvement, psychotherapy, or spirituality will help. If your thoughts and feelings are dominated by the desire for more, they will probably contaminate whatever psychological, religious, or spiritual methods that might interest you. Whether you speculate on the commodities market, exercise and take vitamins, work hard at physical labor, bet on the horseplay, pray to God, communicate with Seth or the Michael entity through the intercession of a channel, cast the I Ching, study the Bible for clues to future events, pre-associate to your dreams, take a seminar or practice Zen meditation. It is quite possible that you are searching unwittingly for some new adventure in the endless competition for wealth, status, and love that is driven by the instinctive desire for reproductive success. Even if some of these methods benefit you in certain ways, it is likely that in the end you will find yourself back at square one again with new desires. Your best hope is to spit in instinct's eye. Your best hope is to renew your intention to want what you have every day for the rest of your life. Chapter 4: How People Change. Reflect upon this amusing story. A sincere and scholarly religious seeker occasionally experimented with mescaline. While spending an evening in his study amid his books, music, and works of art, rapturously intoxicated, he suddenly figured out the secret of happiness. After recovering from his initial exhilaration, he realized that he could not trust himself to remember the secret, so he wrote it on a slip of paper where he would be sure to find it later. Sure enough, he felt groggy the following morning, recalling only dimly that he had discovered something momentous. When he had eventually came across the slip of paper, he recalled that he had written the secret of happiness on it, and that he had felt quite certain of its power and correctness at the time he had written it. His hands trembling with anticipation, he unfolds the scrap of paper. He had written, "Think in different patterns." 20 years ago, when I first heard this story, it seemed funny to me because the man's discovery is obviously true, yet it seems to be spectacularly useless insight. How could anyone learn to alter his pattern of thinking so radically that he could always be happy? Recently, it seems less funny to me. Thinking in different patterns that might produce perennial happiness seems impossible 20 years ago. After I seriously studied and experimented with most forms of psychotherapy, I became increasingly impressed with the theory and technique of cognitive psychotherapy, a method of treatment that has been developed over these years. In cognitive psychotherapy, the therapist actually helps the client learn to think in different patterns. If depressed people can overcome depression by learning to think in different patterns, if anxious people can learn to overcome their fears by thinking in different patterns, if unhappy marital partners can learn to get along better by thinking in different patterns, then why can't ordinary people learn to want what they have by thinking in different patterns? I think they can. I think they can. If you want to learn to want what you have, this is the challenge you face. You must learn to think in different patterns that contradict a lifetime of accumulated habits, not to mention fundamental human instincts. Wanting what you have does not come naturally. Of course, you will need also to feel differently and act differently as well. But thinking in different patterns comes first. That's because most thoughts are voluntary. Therefore, they can be voluntarily modified. Actions often arise automatically from thoughts and beliefs. They can be hard to modify unless the underlying patterns of thinking are changed first. Feelings are completely involuntary, but they also arise primarily from habitual patterns of thinking. How do people change? First, they must have an intense and lasting desire to change. For example, when people ask me to help them stop smoking, the first question I ask is, well, tell me honestly, how badly do you want to quit? People often reply that they really need to quit, or they feel guilty about smoking in front of their children, or their doctors have insisted that they quit. I then reply, okay, I understand that. But you haven't yet told me how strong your desire to quit is. I have learned to anticipate that about half the cigarette smokers who come to me for help will not have a sincere, intense desire to quit. I tell such clients, look, It's my job to help you change, but I can't make you want something you don't want. Quitting cigarettes is so difficult that it is not possible unless you have a strong desire to quit. Call me back if you ever get to that point, and then I will probably be able to help you. How do people change, given that their desire to change is strong and sincere? Why is this such a mystery? If my desire to get warm is so strong and sincere, I put on a sweater, I turn up the thermostat, or build a fire, depending on my circumstances. If I have a strong, sincere desire to get an A in algebra instead of a D, I study harder. How does it happen that people want to change yet are unable to do so? Why don't they just change? In theory, we have free will. Certainly, we like to think we have free will. In practice, neither our minds nor our bodies are entirely our own. A few human functions are particularly voluntary, but most are stubbornly involuntary, though skillful means sometimes allow us to influence them indirectly. These propositions are not obvious to the average person, so we need to investigate them a bit further. Perform the following simple experiments. Number 1. Raise your left arm over your head. Number 2. Imagine you are a skydiver who has just realized your parachute isn't going to open. Number 3. Pay attention to the sensation of having shoes on your feet. Number 4. Say out loud, entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily. Number 5. Think, one of these days the sun will rise for the last time in my life. Number 6. Estimate the likelihood that your house will be burglarized at some point in the next 20 years. Number 7. Recall who Lyndon Johnson's vice president was. You have just exhausted the range of possibilities for voluntary control over yourself and your life. Specifically, your muscles act voluntary, though your actions do not always conform to your intentions. You can voluntarily imagine things, even though your imagination is on automatic pilot about 99% of the time. You can voluntarily direct your attention, though you often get distracted or overlooked important things. You can choose what to say out loud and what not to say, though you sometimes speak in ways that you did not intend. You are capable of voluntary internal conversation, which we call thinking, even though thinking is also on automatic pilot about 99% of the time. Finally, you can solve certain types of intellectual problems, and you can recall certain facts and memories. That's about it. Now try becoming nauseated. Try to slow your heart rate. Now speed it up. Secrete some insulin so as to lower your blood sugar. Get so angry that your face gets red and the veins stand out in your neck. Try to become sexually excited. Stop your intestinal contractions. If you're drowsy, try to become alert. Otherwise, try to get drowsy. Get excited about the World Backgammon Championship. Feel so sad about something that you cry real hard. Feel a great rush of pleasure. If you are hungry, lose your appetite. If you're not hungry, get hungry. Make your left index finger hurt. Become obsessed with the idea that your dentist has hidden a tiny radio transmitter in one of your teeth. Get a headache. Become allergic to your socks. Have an orgasm. Fall in love with the nearest redhead. Choose to hate the neighbor who lives 2 doors down to your right. Get really curious about mattress stuffing. You didn't do so well. You have just experienced a few of the thousands of functions that profoundly influence your life but are beyond your voluntary control. The number of involuntary functions is huge, while the number of voluntary functions is quite small. Do you see now why you cannot simply will yourself to want what you have? Desires are generally involuntary. The experience of enjoyment is generally involuntary. When you wish to change, improve yourself in any way, what you must do is use your few voluntary abilities in one of 2 ways. Either practice new voluntary abilities until they become skillful and automatic, or learn to influence some of your involuntary functions indirectly. If you are studying calculus, practice volleyball or learning to cook. Involuntary functions are usually not important. In other forms of self-improvement, say becoming a better spouse or parent, influence over involuntary functions becomes much more important. For example, I once treated a young father who could not control his feelings of anger when his fussy baby cried. His angry feelings were not hard to understand. The baby had not been planned, came at a bad time, and developed an expensive and inconvenient medical problem. He loved his wife and children and repeatedly promised himself that he would no longer feel angry at his baby, but the feelings kept coming. Gaining influence over involuntary functions isn't easy, but it can be done. Understanding, combined with skillful means, makes it possible. Practice helps too. Here's a simple example. Try to salivate. Few people are able to salivate on command. Now imagine yourself walking to the fruit bowl. You select a fat yellow lemon. Take a knife from the drawer and cut the lemon in half. In your imagination, pick up one half of the lemon. Squeeze it a little until drops of juice ooze out. Raise it to your mouth and slowly lick the freshly cut surface. Are you salivating now? You used your voluntary image-forming ability to cause salivation, which is normally involuntary. You now know how to salivate on command. In theory, you will know how for the rest of your life, though there is a good chance you will soon forget that you know how to do it. If you practice diligently, you can learn to salivate almost instantly, with very little effort, in the same way that good actors and actresses learn to cry on demand. You could also learn how to stop salivating. Try thinking about eating garbage. Most psychotherapy patients want to learn how to influence some involuntary function that is causing trouble. Additionally, some patients have lost control over functions that are normally voluntary. That is, they want to break a bad habit. Here are a few examples. A secretary often gets diarrhea for a few minutes after her insensitive, overbearing boss criticizes her. She becomes so preoccupied with the fear of losing bowel control in public that she is reluctant to leave the house. A successful businessman finds himself inexplicably irritated by one of his secretaries, even though her work performance is good. He repeatedly resolves to treat her with more kindness, but he often ends up picking on her. A woman has an attractive, likable husband with few character flaws. She freely admits that most women would find him desirable and their kids adore him. She loved him once, and she wishes she loved him now, but the feelings just aren't there. A man knows that his wife no longer loves him. At first, he felt anxious and ashamed, wondering what he had done wrong. He now knows that it is her problem. If he could just feel that life without her was worth living. A teenage boy promises himself, his parents, and all his friends that the next time the neighborhood bully harasses him, he will not run away. He knows that even if he gets into a fight, he will not likely be injured and certainly not killed. He has been practicing boxing in the backyard with his dad, and he is getting the hang of it, yet he continues to run away in shame. A college professor is inordinately fond of 3 or 4 beers after dinner. She looks forward to getting a little high after a hard day, but sometimes the alcohol makes her hostile towards the people she loves. Sometimes she drinks far more than she intended. She resolves to drink 3 beers or fewer after dinner, but to her deep regret, she usually drinks more than that. You probably understand that these cases are not far-fetched. They may remind you of some difficulty you have struggled with at some time. How do psychotherapists help resolve such problems? Once again, we must settle for short answers. How psychotherapists help people change depend on their methods and beliefs. Usually, they stick with the ones they learned early in their training. Psychoanalysts encourage the patient to pay attention to the distant memories and private fantasies that most people ignore. Psychotherapists who practice client-centered therapy, pioneered by Carl Rogers, encourage the patient to discuss with the therapist any matter that seems important in a spontaneous, honest manner. Behavior therapists concentrate on specific voluntary behaviors and the pleasant or unpleasant experiences that trigger them or result from them. Cognitive therapy emphasizes the importance of conscious thoughts and beliefs. This makes obvious sense because conscious thoughts and beliefs are ultimately voluntary. We have considerable conscious control over what we think. Our routine thoughts form the basis for what we believe. Four fundamental ideas form the foundation for cognitive therapy. All four are consistent with common sense. All four have been supported repeatedly in scientific experiments. I present them here in detail because I will form the foundation of the methods I suggest for wanting what you have. The first assumption of cognitive therapy is that many conscious thoughts and beliefs are simply habits. They are not necessarily accurate, logical, or constructive. For example, when was the last time you put 9 groups of 6 marbles each in a coffee can and then counted them all to prove to yourself that 9 times 6 equals 54? You assume it's true. I had a patient who assumed that all women really dislike making love, even if they pretended to enjoy it. He believed it in the same way that he believed the multiplication tables. It never occurred to him to discuss it with anyone because he also considered it a distasteful topic. He never noticed evidence to the contrary. One of the ways I helped him was simply to encourage him to doubt his assumptions and to start noticing evidence to the contrary. The second assumption of cognitive therapy is that the conscious thoughts and beliefs have powerful and inevitable emotional consequences. This is not obvious to everyone, but it is easily illustrated. One of my psychotherapy clients became convinced around the age of 7 years old that she was quite stupid, just barely above the mentally retarded level. She had good reason to think so, and many subsequent experiences confirmed her belief. Even though it was incorrect, she is now a sensible, articulate, well-read woman with many useful skills. Nevertheless, she has spent her entire adulthood dreading contact with people outside her immediate family because of fears that her stupidity might be noticed or cruelly ridiculed. If you do not believe that you are stupid, then it might be hard to take this example very seriously. But reflect for a moment. What sort of childhood experiences might have convinced you that you were stupid? What sort of experiences might have perpetuated that belief? If you were so unfortunate to believe that, how would your emotions work differently today? The third assumption of cognitive therapy is that conscious beliefs can become submerged and difficult to identify. To continue the above example, my fearful client did not know that she believed herself stupid. She didn't deny it either. It just didn't come up. She was so overwhelmed by her fears that it was hard for her to identify her thoughts and beliefs about social contact with other people. Careful introspection, guided and coached by me, gradually revealed the beliefs that underlaid her fear. The fourth assumption of cognitive therapy is that the most powerful method of changing involuntary reactions or breaking bad habits is to discard old habits of thinking and develop new ones. This is true whether or not the problem, feeling, or behavior has an instinctive or genetic origin. For example, there's strong evidence that depressive disorders run in families and involve abnormal brain chemistry. Nevertheless, cognitive therapy has repeatedly been shown to alleviate depression at least as well as antidepressant drugs and better than other therapy methods. My client is breaking the habit of believing that she is stupid. As a result, she's becoming less afraid of people. It may be that instinctive fears and aversions are harder to alter than learned ones, but it can be done. People gleefully jump from high places with parachutes or bungee cords or into water, contrary to a universal instinctive fear of falling. The fear is part of the fun. If you systematically examine the methods people use to overcome their reluctance to jump from high places, you will find that deliberately altering beliefs and habits of thought lie at the center. A word of caution. The methods I suggest are not substitute for psychotherapy. They are intended for healthy seekers. By this, I mean people who are generally able to love and work, who do not often behave in self-defeating ways, and who are not often tormented by severe psychological symptoms. It may well be that some tormented or self-defeating people will benefit from the methods I suggest, but there are limits to self-help. Professional football teams need coaches. and daily life is a lot harder than football. On the other hand, there is no necessary contradiction between psychotherapy and my methods. My methods for wanting what you have are easily summarized. I recommend the deliberate, constant practice of compassion, attention, and gratitude. Each of these principles is easily understood in cognitive terms. Each is facilitated by cognitive methods. Each method is intended to systematically alter certain key beliefs and habits of thought. Beyond recommending new beliefs and habits of thought, I will suggest various experiments in living and thinking. Each of the three principles approaches the problem of relentless, instinctive striving from a different perspective. Each complements the other two. Each makes the other two necessary. I will briefly discuss them in turn. I will begin the next chapter with compassion.